My name is Tom. I'm 42 years old, and this happened in the vast, barren stretches on the outskirts of the Toyabe National Forest in eastern Nevada. I left behind a life burdened with regret, a tragic accident that stole someone dear from me, and sought refuge in the isolation of the desert. I parked my creaky old RV on a lonely patch of land, determined to find solace and, perhaps, redemption in the quiet wilderness. I arrived just after dusk, the burning hues of a dying sun giving way to a sky strewn with stars. The desert air was cool, and as I set up camp I couldn't help but feel that the solitude around me was both a comfort and a warning. I had driven for hours, my thoughts echoing with memories of loss and the weight of guilt that seemed to follow me like a shadow. My only companion, besides the creaks and rattles of my aging RV, was the hope that this escape might bring me a measure of peace. The first night, as I sat by a small campfire outside the RV, the silence of the desert was punctuated by a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. A long, mournful wail that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. It wasn't the cry of any animal I'd known. It was a voice filled with deep sorrow, as if the very wind were lamenting an ancient loss. I couldn't sleep that night, the sound echoing in my ears, mingling with the whispering winds that stirred the sparse desert brush. The next morning, the sun rose over a horizon that looked both beautiful and desolate. With the memories of the previous night still haunting me, I decided to explore the area around my campsite. As I wandered along a narrow trail, I stumbled upon strange markings etched into a large, weathered rock. The symbols were not modern graffiti, they were intricate, ancient designs, clearly crafted by hands long past. I recalled local legends about Native American tribes who once roamed these lands, using such symbols to ward off evil or perhaps to honor sacred rituals. A chill ran down my spine as I carefully traced the carvings with my fingertips. Was I trespassing on hallowed ground? Later that day, while I sat in the RV reading an old journal I'd brought along, an attempt to distract my mind, I heard a soft hum outside, almost like someone softly calling my name. I peered out the window, but the vast desert was empty except for the lingering heat shimmer of the day. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted, an unshakable sensation that set my nerves on edge. In the small town I passed through briefly on my way to this secluded spot, locals had spoken in hushed tones about a spectral presence. They mentioned a banshee known as the Wailing Spirit, a harbinger of sorrow and misfortune, drawn to those burdened by grief. I had dismissed such talk as superstition at the time, but now, in the wake of the eerie sounds and ancient symbols, the tales began to feel all too real. That evening, as twilight deepened into darkness, I returned to my RV with a growing sense of dread. I decided to take a short walk around the perimeter of my camp, hoping to clear my head. The air was thick with the scent of sage and dust, and the sky was a tapestry of shimmering stars. Suddenly, as I passed by a cluster of scrubby bushes, I saw her, a spectral figure of a woman in tattered garments, her eyes filled with a sorrow so profound it nearly overwhelmed me. For a fleeting moment our eyes met, and I swear I saw my own pain reflected back at me. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she melted into the darkness, leaving me trembling and questioning my sanity. The nights that followed were a relentless barrage of eerie disturbances. I began to hear disembodied whispers echoing through the desert night, their words unintelligible but laden with an emotion I couldn't ignore, a deep, unending sadness. The once comforting solitude of the wilderness now felt oppressive, as though the land itself was mourning with me. I tried to convince myself that my grief was playing tricks on my mind, but every unexplained sound and shifting shadow deepened my unease. On the third night, a severe thunderstorm erupted unexpectedly. The RV was battered by violent gusts, and the rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the desert floor into a muddy quagmire. I sat inside, trying to keep the engine running for warmth and light, when a sudden, fierce gust of wind slammed the RV's door shut. For a moment, I was plunged into darkness as the power flickered. When the lights came back on, I felt a cold presence near the door, so close that I could almost feel a chill breath on my neck. I tried to steady my racing heart, but the sound of the storm was drowned out by what I now recognized as a series of low, sorrowful moans carried on the wind. In the midst of the storm, I resolved to seek answers. The next day, determined yet hesitant, I ventured into the nearby small town in search of someone who might know more about the local legends. There, in a modest general store, I met Eli, a weathered, reclusive elder with eyes that seemed to hold decades of secrets. Over a cup of bitter coffee, Eli listened intently as I recounted my experiences. His expression grew somber, and he leaned in close to warn me in a low, gravelly voice. "You're not alone in your sorrow, Tom," he said. "There's a spirit here, a banshee known as the Wailing Spirit. She's drawn to those who carry deep grief in their hearts. They say she was once a woman who suffered a great injustice, and now her spirit roams these lands, mourning and warning. If you let your pain fester, she will claim it, and maybe more." Eli's words struck a chord deep within me. I had always believed that my grief was my burden to bear alone, but here was a man who seemed to understand the intangible connection between sorrow and the supernatural. I thanked him, though his words only deepened the turmoil inside me. Could it be that the spectral figure I had seen was more than a figment of my imagination? Had my unresolved guilt and grief made me a beacon for this haunted presence? That very night, the storm had subsided into a heavy, oppressive silence. Determined to confront the mystery head-on, I decided to keep watch outside the RV. I sat on an old wooden chair, my eyes straining against the darkness, listening intently for any sound beyond the usual rustling of desert life. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and just as I began to doubt my resolve, I saw her again, the banshee. This time, she was closer than before, emerging from the shadows like a ghost from another era. Her form was shrouded in a faint, ethereal light, and her eyes, filled with an endless sorrow, seemed to penetrate the depths of my soul. For a long, heart-stopping moment, time seemed to stand still. I could feel the weight of her presence, the echo of her own unspoken grief mingling with mine. The banshee's silent gaze was not one of pure malice. It was a mirror reflecting all the pain I had tried so desperately to bury. Overwhelmed by a surge of emotions, I slowly rose from my chair and stepped outside, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and a desperate need for understanding. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper into the still night, my voice barely audible above the quiet hum of the desert. There was no reply, only the soft sound of the wind carrying her sorrow. I stood there, feeling an inexplicable connection, as if she was calling me to face the ghosts of my past. In that tense moment, I made a decision. I would confront this presence, not as an enemy, but as a part of my own broken spirit that needed healing. I returned to my RV and gathered some old notebooks and a flashlight, then set out into the darkness, following the path I believed the banshee might be guiding me along. I wandered through the desert, the faint glow of her figure leading me deeper into a landscape that seemed to shift and change with every step I took. As the night wore on, the banshee's form became more distinct. I began to see her moving among clusters of sagebrush and rocky outcrops, her tattered dress billowing in an unseen wind. With each step, I felt my defenses crumble and memories of my past painful, regretful, and unyielding, rushed back in a torrent. I recalled the accident, the voices of loved ones lost, and the crushing burden of guilt that had haunted me for years. When I finally reached a clearing, the banshee stood before me in all her spectral sorrow. The storm had given way to an eerie stillness, and the only sounds were the quiet whispers of the desert night. I knelt down, my knees trembling in the cold, and spoke directly to her. "I know your pain," I said, my voice wavering with raw emotion. "I know what it's like to carry a burden you can't shake off. I've lost someone, and I've carried that guilt with me every day since. I'm not here to challenge you or fear you. I'm here to face what I've been running from." For what felt like an eternity, the banshee remained silent, her eyes locked onto mine. In that moment, I sensed that her sorrow was not entirely separate from my own. It was as if our spirits were intertwined in a shared narrative of loss and regret. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to fade into the darkness. The oppressive weight in the air lifted ever so slightly, replaced by a tentative calm. I returned to my RV that night with a heavy heart and a mind awash with conflicting emotions. Had I just experienced a supernatural visitation, or had the intensity of my own grief conjured this apparition from the depths of my sorrow? I couldn't be sure, but one thing was certain. The banshee had forced me to confront the raw, unhealed wounds of my past. In the days that followed, I stayed at my secluded campsite, trying to make sense of the surreal events. Each night, the banshee's mournful wails would echo faintly across the desert, but her once intense presence had lessened to a distant memory. I spent my days revisiting the symbols I had discovered earlier and reflecting on the old journals and stories I had picked up from Eli in town. I began to write down my experiences, hoping that putting my thoughts to paper would help ease the burden I carried. Slowly, the nightly encounters became less about terror and more about understanding. I found that as I acknowledged my own grief, the banshee's wails became softer, as though she were mourning not only her own lost life, but also the lost opportunities for forgiveness that we both shared. In quiet moments before dawn, as the first light crept over the horizon, I could almost sense that the banshee was no longer a harbinger of doom, but rather a reflection of the sorrow that needed healing. I spent several more nights in that place, each one a quiet meditation on loss, memory, and the possibility of redemption. The desert, with its endless expanse and haunting beauty, became a sanctuary where I could face my demons without distraction. I began to understand that some ghosts, whether of the past or of the spirit world, are not meant to be vanquished by force, but acknowledged and embraced as part of our journey. One evening, after a particularly long day of introspection, I sat outside my RV watching the stars shimmer above the vast desert. The banshee appeared one last time, a faint, sorrowful silhouette against the tapestry of night. Her eyes met mine, and in that silent exchange, I felt a profound understanding pass between us. I knew then that I had begun the slow, painful process of forgiving myself, of accepting that the past, no matter how tragic, does not have to define the future. In the quiet aftermath of that final encounter, I made the decision to leave the solitude of the Toyabé National Forest. I packed up my old RV with a sense of bittersweet relief, a feeling that I had finally taken a step toward healing. As I drove away from the campsite, the banshee's wails receded into a distant echo, a reminder that while some pains never fully disappear, they can eventually lose their power over us. Now, as I write these words from the comfort of my modest home, far from the relentless quiet of the desert, I realize that my journey was not just about escaping grief, but about embracing it. The banshee, the wailing spirit, was a manifestation of the sorrow that I had buried deep within me. By facing her, I was forced to confront my own pain, and, in doing so, began to understand that healing comes from acceptance rather than denial. I still feel the desert's pull from time to time, a subtle reminder in the whisper of the wind, a flicker of light in the corner of my eye. But I no longer fear that presence. Instead, I regard it as a part of my own story, a spectral echo of a time when grief and isolation threatened to consume me. I've learned that some ghosts, whether they haunt the wilderness or the corridors of our hearts, are not merely forces of terror, they are also teachers, guiding us toward a deeper understanding of who we are. The experience left me forever changed. I now approach life with a cautious optimism, knowing that the path to healing is fraught with pain, but also illuminated by moments of unexpected grace. The memory of that barren stretch of desert, the echo of the banshee's lament, and the silent acknowledgement of my own guilt serve as daily reminders that the line between the tangible and the ethereal is as thin as the night air. In the end, the wilderness taught me that solitude can be a double-edged sword, capable of both deep introspection and profound despair. Yet, if one is brave enough to confront the ghosts within, even the most sorrowful wails can eventually fade into a soft, almost comforting lullaby. That is the lesson I carry with me now, as I continue to navigate the winding roads of life with the scars of the past, as both a reminder and a source of strength. This is my story, a tale of isolation, spectral encounters, and the slow, painful journey toward self-forgiveness. I share it not as a warning of the terrors that lurk in the wilderness, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Sometimes, the things that haunt us are not meant to destroy us, but to help us see the light hidden within the darkest corners of our souls. My name is Dana Rivera. I'm 32 years old, and this happened in the vast, isolated wilderness of northern Nevada, a time when the line between myth and reality blurred into a living nightmare. I had always been drawn to the allure of ancient legends and the promise of uncovering truths hidden in remote places. When Kevin Marshall, my RV partner on this journey, and I planned our trip to Great Basin National Park near Wheeler Peak, I was filled with excitement and a hint of trepidation. Kevin, ever the practical skeptic, dismissed most supernatural notions as nothing more than fanciful folklore, while I trusted my gut and the stories passed down by the indigenous Paiute people. Our old RV, a clunky relic that had seen better days, rattled along the gravel roads leading deep into the backwoods. I'd spent weeks preparing, poring over local legends, and mapping out the ancient sites said to be haunted by spirits. Kevin's only concern was whether our aging equipment could survive the harsh conditions that Nevada's wilderness was notorious for. It was clear from the start that our vehicle was as much a character in this story as the land itself. The radio crackled with static even before we left civilization, and the lights flickered ominously whenever the wind picked up. We arrived at our first destination just as the sun was dipping behind the jagged peaks. I remember feeling a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. Setting up camp near a clearing marked by ancient Paiute petroglyphs, I couldn't shake the sensation that we were trespassing on something sacred and fiercely protected. Dana, can you believe this old RV is our best shot at getting out here? Kevin remarked, as he fiddled with the malfunctioning radio, trying to coax a coherent signal from the static. His tone was light, but I could hear the underlying tension. I smiled weakly, though my mind was racing with thoughts of the legends I had read. It's not about what we have, Kevin. It's about what we find out here. The stories, they're all based on real events, passed down through generations. Kevin scoffed softly, shaking his head. Real events, sure. But ghosts, spirits, I'm more inclined to blame faulty wiring than ancient curses. I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration mixed with a rising sense of foreboding. That night, as I sat by the RV's small campfire, I noticed something odd. The radio, which had been spewing static all evening, suddenly intercepted a faint transmission. It was a whispering murmur in the language I couldn't identify, possibly Paiute. The words were indistinct, but there was an undeniable cadence, as if someone or something was trying to communicate across the veil of time. I tried to mention it to Kevin, but he waved it off. Probably just interference, Dana. You're letting your imagination run wild. But deep down, I knew the interference was something more. I felt it in the air, a palpable heaviness that turned the night unnervingly cold. The wind ceased, and an eerie silence fell over the clearing. That silence was broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible crunch of leaves behind us. I glanced over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of something moving in the dark, a shifting shadow among the junipers, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. I leaned forward, straining to see, and my heart pounded in my ears. The shapes along the tree line seemed to warp and distort, as if the forest itself were trying to hide a terrible secret. The following day, we set out to explore an ancient site marked by deeply weathered stone carvings. The symbols etched into the rock formations were unmistakably indigenous, protective signs that served as warnings. Kevin was unimpressed by the markings, insisting that they were simply remnants of an old culture, no different from those found in museums. I, however, felt a profound respect mixed with dread as I ran my fingers along the rough carvings, whispering silent apologies for disturbing something sacred. As twilight approached, our tension mounted. Kevin's dismissive attitude had shifted. He was no longer just a skeptic. The unexplained events had begun to erode his confidence in his logical explanations. I could see it in his eyes, the uncertainty, the dawning realization that something malevolent was stalking us. That evening, we set up camp at a clearing near one of the more prominent rock formations. The RV was parked in a small natural amphitheater formed by towering junipers and rugged cliffs. The night was unnervingly still. I remember sitting on the RV's steps, clutching a well-worn journal filled with notes on local lore and legends, when the air around me grew inexplicably frigid. The RV's old heater sputtered and failed, plunging us into darkness save for the feeble glow of our campfire. It was then that we first saw the figure. At the edge of the light, barely visible, there stood a shape that seemed to shift with every flicker of the flame. It was not a static apparition, but something in constant, fluid motion, a shapeshifter. I felt my breath catch as the figure's form twisted and elongated, its features indistinguishable, as if it were made of shadow and mist. Kevin, roused by the sound of my startled gasp, joined me at the fire. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "A figure. It was like nothing I've ever seen. It kept moving, changing shape. It wasn't human," I replied, my voice trembling. Before Kevin could dismiss it as a trick of the light or a hallucination born from fatigue, the figure drifted closer. The temperature dropped further, and I could see our breath in the cold air. The shape seemed to hover just at the periphery of our vision, watching us silently. I recalled the Paiute legends of a spirit that could take on many forms, a skinwalker, a creature of both cunning and malice, born of ancient curses and tribal retribution. As the night deepened, the disturbances escalated. The RV's doors creaked open on their own, and faint, eerie footsteps circled our camp. I began to notice strange scratches on the walls of the RV, marks that resembled clawed impressions. At one point, I found what appeared to be remnants of ritualistic artifacts near the base of a juniper tree, fragments of a carved totem, partly buried in the earth. The symbols on the totem echoed those I'd seen on the rocks earlier, intensifying the sense that we were in the midst of something ancient and wrathful. The next morning, exhausted and on edge, Kevin and I decided to press on to a location that promised more historical context, a reclusive Paiute settlement rumored to harbor elders who still held knowledge of the old ways. We hoped that the elders' insight could help us understand and possibly appease the malevolent presence that had stalked us. Our journey off the beaten path was fraught with further complications. The RV's mechanical issues worsened, and our supplies dwindled as unexpected delays forced us to ration food and water. Tensions between us flared. Kevin's practical nature clashed with my increasingly urgent need to address the supernatural occurrences. He accused me of letting ancient superstitions cloud my judgment, while I chided him for his close-mindedness in the face of undeniable events. One particularly harrowing night, as the wind howled outside and the RV shuddered with each gust, the entity made its most aggressive move yet. I awoke to the sound of shattering glass and Kevin's frantic shouts. Rushing out, I found the RV battered by an unseen force. Windows were cracked, and the door hung off its hinges. In the chaotic shadows, I saw the figure again, now unmistakably hostile. It moved with a speed and ferocity that defied belief, its form blurring as it lunged toward us. Kevin tried to fend it off with a heavy flashlight, but it was like trying to hit a phantom. The creature's presence was overwhelming. And in the melee, Kevin was struck by a sharp, unseen force. I watched in horror as he staggered, blood seeping from a deep wound on his arm. His eyes, once filled with derision at the supernatural, now shimmered with fear and a desperate plea for help. Desperate and on the brink of panic, I recalled a passage from one of the Paiute legends about a ritual to appease a vengeful spirit. With trembling hands, I rummaged through our meager supplies for anything that might serve as ritualistic paraphernalia. I drew from my journal the symbols and incantations I had carefully transcribed, and in a moment of clarity, born of sheer terror, I began to recite them aloud, hoping to call upon the ancient powers for protection. The air around me thickened, and the unnatural cold deepened further. It was as if the very fabric of the night was resisting my incantations. The entity circled the RV, its form flickering in and out of existence, as if it were testing the limits of my newfound resolve. I could see Kevin, pale and in pain, trying to steady himself, his skeptical facade now replaced with raw, unadulterated fear. That night, amidst the chaos and supernatural onslaught, fate intervened. A knock at the battered door startled us both. I opened it cautiously to find a reclusive Paiute elder, his presence radiating quiet authority and calm. His weathered face bore the lines of countless winters, and his eyes held the deep wisdom of a people long in tune with the land. Without a word, he stepped inside, his gaze assessing the damage, the blood on Kevin's arm, and the palpable aura of dread that filled the RV. In a hushed tone, the elder explained that the entity haunting us was not merely a restless spirit, but a shape-shifting demon, a manifestation of a curse that had been inflicted upon the land centuries ago. It was an avenging force, born of ancient grievances and nurtured by the neglect of its sacred warnings. The elder's words, heavy with sorrow and urgency, resonated with both of us. He quickly set about preparing a small ritual using items he carried in a weathered satchel: herbs, small stones, and a hand-carved talisman that pulsed with an otherworldly glow. He instructed me and Kevin to stand at opposite ends of the RV with the elder in the center. In a measured cadence, he began chanting in Paiute, a language that seemed to awaken the very essence of the wilderness. As his words filled the cramped interior, the oppressive atmosphere began to shift. Outside, the violent winds subsided, and the once erratic shadows of the night grew still. The entity, sensing the change, surged forward one last time, its form now a chaotic mix of rage and despair. In that climactic moment, as the elder's voice reached a fever pitch, I felt a surge of inexplicable strength, a fusion of my own determination and the ancestral energy that pulsed through the ritual. I joined in the chant, my voice merging with the elders in a harmonious plea for peace. The entity recoiled, its form wavering violently as if caught in a storm. For what felt like an eternity, we chanted until the oppressive presence slowly receded, retreating into the dark crevices of the wilderness. In the aftermath, as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, the silence that replaced the night's chaos was profound. Kevin, though injured, managed a weak smile, a silent acknowledgement that his skepticism had been irrevocably shattered by what we had witnessed. The Paiute elder quietly explained that, while the ritual had forced the entity to retreat, it was not entirely vanquished. The curse, like a festering wound on the land, would continue to haunt these remote parts, a stark reminder of the delicate balance between nature and the supernatural. In the following days, as we made our way back toward civilization, the memory of that night lingered like a shadow. The RV, battered and unreliable as ever, seemed to creak with a newfound respect for the forces it had borne witness to. Kevin's recovery was slow, both physically and in terms of his belief system. He no longer dismissed my warnings with a smirk, but instead shared in the cautious reverence that had taken root in me. I documented every detail in my journal: the static-filled radio transmissions, the shifting shadows, the carved symbols, and the overwhelming presence of a vengeful spirit. I poured my heart and soul into these pages, not only as a record of our terrifying ordeal, but also as a tribute to the enduring power of indigenous lore. The stories of the Paiute people, their reverence for the land, and their cautionary legends had come alive in a way that was as beautiful as it was terrifying. Even now, as I sit at my desk far from the rugged wilds of the Great Basin, I can still hear the faint echo of the Paiute chants and feel the cold breath of the entity on my neck during the long, sleepless nights. My journey changed me. It taught me that some legends are more than mere stories. They are warnings, etched in time, calling out to those who dare disturb the ancient balance of nature. In the months that followed, I dedicated myself to learning more about the old ways. I reached out to local historians, indigenous elders, and even skeptics like Kevin, who by then had transformed his disbelief into a quest for understanding. Together, we embarked on several smaller excursions into the wilderness, always with a deep respect for the forces at play, and always with the memory of that fateful night guiding our every step. The entity remains an enigma, a dangerous, violent force that may one day return if its sacred warnings are once again ignored. For me, the experience was both a terrifying brush with death and a profound lesson in humility. The land of the Great Basin is not just a backdrop for human adventure. It is a living, breathing entity with its own stories, its own guardians, and its own secrets. I often wonder, in quiet moments, if the entity still watches from the periphery of the junipers, waiting for another wanderer to awaken its wrath. The RV may be old and creaking, but it carries the scars of that night, a testament to the fragility of our mortal existence in the face of ancient, relentless power. And as I continue to document and share these experiences, I do so with the hope that others might learn to respect the land, the legends, and the delicate balance between the seen and the unseen. My name is Dana Rivera, and I carry the weight of that night with me. A constant reminder that in the wild heart of the Great Basin, some shadows are meant to remain, and some legends are all too real. My name is Jack Henderson. I'm 45 years old, and this happened in the unforgiving wilderness of northern Nevada, a time when the silence of the desert was shattered by echoes of something far more sinister than my own haunted past. I'd left behind the memories of a lost family and a career in the military, desperate for isolation and a chance to reclaim control over my life. I purchased an old RV, a battered hunk of machinery that promised freedom on the endless roads of the Black Rock Desert and the adjacent Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest. I was determined to find solace, even if it meant facing the harsh realities of the desert and the demons that lurked in my mind. The journey began with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The RV, already showing signs of its age with creaking panels and an unreliable navigation system, rumbled along dusty backroads under a sky so vast it threatened to swallow me whole. I had planned this trip meticulously, choosing a route that would take me near Devil's Crossing, a remote area whispered about in local lore as a place where the line between civilization and madness blurred. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was simply seeking solitude and the chance to reflect on the choices that had led me here. About a week into my trip, as I maneuvered along a particularly desolate stretch of highway, the RV sputtered and coughed. The engine's hum died, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. With no cell service and the nearest town miles away, I was forced to pull over near a narrow canyon that marked Devil's Crossing. I parked in a small clearing beside an abandoned campsite that I noticed from afar. Tattered tarps flapping in the breeze and old, rusted personal belongings scattered about like relics of a forgotten struggle. Curiosity mingled with a cautious sense of foreboding as I stepped out into the harsh desert light. The campsite was disturbingly quiet. Near the base of a weathered juniper tree, I discovered odd symbols etched into the bark. Strange, looping carvings that resembled the kind of ritualistic markings I had read about in obscure texts on indigenous lore. The carvings hinted at rites once performed to ward off dark forces, though here they seemed to signal something entirely different, something meant to invite a darker presence. I gathered what little tools I had in my RV, a flashlight that flickered as if warning me of its own inadequacy, a multi-tool, and a weathered notebook in which I scribbled down my thoughts. I tried to piece together clues, my military training urging me to examine every detail. Yet, as dusk fell and the desert transformed under the glow of a blood-red sunset, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, the silence of the desert was punctured by strange, echoing sounds. I sat outside the RV, leaning against its cool, dented side, and listened. There were distant voices, muffled whispers carried by the wind, interspersed with the occasional sound of gravel crunching underfoot. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, but as the minutes dragged on, the whispers grew more distinct, almost like a chant in a language I couldn't understand. My mind raced with unsettling possibilities. Were these merely the sounds of the desert, or something far more deliberate? I decided to retire for the night, though sleep was elusive. In the dark hours before dawn, I awoke repeatedly to the sound of footsteps approaching the RV. Each time I peered through the window, my heart pounding as I saw nothing but the undulating shadows of the barren landscape. My paranoia, a constant companion since my time in the service, was hard to silence. The isolation, the failing equipment, and the eerie surroundings all conspired to erode my resolve. Morning brought little relief. The RV's engine remained stubbornly silent, and I was forced to begin repairs with limited supplies. As I scavenged the interior for spare parts, I couldn't help but notice fresh scratches along the side of the vehicle. Deep, irregular gouges that hadn't been there before. They looked almost deliberate, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way through the metal. I chalked it up to desert wildlife at first, but the precision of the marks left me questioning that theory. I decided to explore further, hoping that finding some clue to my RV's breakdown might also explain the unsettling events of the previous night. I followed a narrow, dusty trail that led away from the campsite into the barren expanse. The further I walked, the more the oppressive stillness of the desert wrapped around me like a shroud. There were no signs of modern life, only the remnants of a campsite and the cryptic symbols carved into weathered stone and bark. As the sun climbed higher, I came across a makeshift altar, its base circled by stones and adorned with crude totems. Old bones, perhaps from small desert creatures, lay scattered around it, and dried herbs, unidentified but pungent, were burned to a crisp. My military mind cataloged every detail. The arrangement was deliberate, a ritual site left by those who had once inhabited this forsaken corner of the world. The signs were unmistakable. The campsite wasn't abandoned by accident. It had been used recently, and not by ordinary travelers. That evening, as the sky turned a haunting shade of twilight purple, I set up my temporary shelter beside the ruined altar. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had intruded on a secret that was never meant for prying eyes. I made myself a small meal from the supplies I had, trying to ignore the growing anxiety in the pit of my stomach. The desert, usually so vast and empty, now felt claustrophobic, as though every rock and shrub was concealing a watchful gaze. The first true sign that something was terribly wrong came just after midnight. I was awakened by a sound that sent a chill racing down my spine, a series of low, rhythmic chants echoing across the silent dunes. I rose and stepped out into the darkness, my breath visible in the cool air. The chanting was coming from the direction of the altar. With my heart hammering in my chest, I approached cautiously, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. As I neared, I caught sight of movement, a flicker of figures in the distance, cloaked in shadows. They moved with an eerie precision, as if rehearsing a ritual of old. I crouched behind a large boulder, my instincts screaming at me to hide. The figures drew closer, and I could see that they were wearing crude masks fashioned from animal hides and bones. Their eyes, if they had any, were hidden in the dark recesses of the masks. One of them held a torch that cast grotesque shadows on the ground, and I realized with a dawning horror that I had stumbled upon something far beyond my comprehension. I retreated silently, every step measured and deliberate, until I reached the safety of my RV. Once inside, I bolted the door and sat in the dim glow of the failing battery-powered lamp. I scribbled down everything in my notebook, the words coming out in a frantic scrawl. The images of masked figures, ancient symbols, and the chilling chants burned themselves into my memory. I knew then that what I was dealing with wasn't a natural phenomenon, but a human force, one steeped in twisted ritual and unspeakable violence. In the days that followed, my situation grew increasingly perilous. With the RV rendered inoperable and my communications dead, I was forced to continue on foot. I scavenged for parts, food and water, all the while haunted by the specter of the cult that had marked its territory here. My nights became a blur of sleep fitful with nightmares, and my days were spent evading the ever-looming threat of capture or worse. One afternoon, as I trudged through the arid landscape, I found remnants of a trail, fresh footprints in the soft desert soil that led toward a rocky outcropping. Desperation and the need for answers propelled me forward. I followed the footprints until I reached a narrow ravine where the air was thick with the scent of burning sage and something acrid I couldn't place. There, hidden among the rocks, I discovered a small encampment. The people here were different. Wild-eyed, clad in ragged clothing, their faces painted with symbols that mirrored those I'd seen at the altar. I recognized them immediately from the fleeting glimpse I'd had on that fateful night. The cannibal cult known as the Followers of the Forgotten. Their name wasn't spoken aloud in the few scattered whispers among locals, but I'd pieced together fragments of conversation overheard in rundown diners and deserted gas stations. They were rumored to perform rituals meant to invoke the spirit of an ancient deity, one that demanded human sacrifice and feasted on the souls of the unwary. My heart pounded as I hid behind a rocky outcrop, watching as the cult members gathered around a makeshift fire. Their chanting resumed, louder and more fervent than before, as they prepared for what appeared to be a ritual sacrifice. The sight of it turned my stomach, and a surge of adrenaline forced me into action. I couldn't let them find me. I slipped away silently, moving along the rock face until I reached a narrow path that might lead me back to some semblance of safety. Every moment was a battle against my own terror and the crushing weight of isolation. The cult's chants echoed in my ears, a relentless reminder that I had become entangled in a web of darkness from which there was no easy escape. As dusk fell again, I found refuge in a shallow cave hidden by overgrown brush. I barricaded the entrance with fallen branches and settled in for a night of restless sleep, every snap of a twig outside sending shivers through my weary frame. I knew I couldn't hide forever. I had to find a way to either repair my RV or make contact with someone, anyone, who could help me escape this nightmare. The next morning, the desert greeted me with a brutal intensity. The sun beat down mercilessly, scorching the cracked earth and reducing the sparse vegetation to brittle remnants of life. I rummaged through my supplies, determined to salvage what I could. My injuries from a previous encounter with one of the cult's ambushers, a deep, jagged gash on my forearm, throbbed with every movement, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. I set off once more, following a barely visible trail that I hoped would lead me to a main road or a settlement. The oppressive solitude of the desert was punctuated by fleeting moments of terror, a rustle behind a dune, an unnatural silence where the wind should be. I was beginning to doubt my sanity, questioning whether the horrors I'd witnessed were the product of a mind unraveling under isolation or the brutal reality of a hidden, violent world. Late in the afternoon, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated building that looked like it had once been a trading post. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Desperation overrode my caution as I stepped inside, hoping to find something, anything, that might offer a clue or a means of escape. The interior was a time capsule of forgotten days. Dusty shelves lined with cracked pottery, faded maps of the region, and a series of handwritten journals that chronicled a time when people dared to traverse these lands. One journal in particular caught my eye. It belonged to a man who had once been a local, a person who had witnessed strange rituals and mysterious disappearances. His entries were frantic and desperate, filled with descriptions of masked figures, nocturnal chants, and a malevolent force that seemed to command the very desert. I read his words with growing horror, each sentence confirming my worst fears, that I was caught in a cycle of violence and ritual far beyond my control. It was then that I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside, accompanied by low, guttural voices. I quickly hid behind a shelf and listened as a group of cult members entered the building. They were discussing plans for a major ritual, one that would require the sacrifice of an outsider. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was not the first intruder to be marked by these fanatics, and I might be their next target. Heart pounding, I knew I had to act fast. I gathered what little I could carry, a few supplies, my notebook, and the journal that had shed so much light on the cult's twisted history, and slipped out a back window. The desert night was my ally as I raced through the darkness, the journal clutched tightly in my hand like a talisman against the encroaching madness. I moved with a soldier's precision, each step calculated to minimize sound and avoid drawing attention. The cult's presence was omnipresent, their chants echoing in my ears as I navigated the labyrinth of rocky outcroppings and shifting sands. Every now and then I would pause, pressing my back against the rough stone and listening intently, as if the silence itself might betray their approach. By dawn, I had reached a narrow dirt road that I hoped would lead to civilization. My body ached, and my mind was reeling from the constant barrage of terror. But a spark of hope flickered within me, a belief that perhaps I could escape this desert of nightmares and find redemption for my haunted past. I flagged down an old pickup truck at a remote gas station on the edge of the desert. The driver, a weathered man with wary eyes, listened as I recounted my tale in broken fragments. He didn't ask many questions. His silence and subtle nods spoke volumes about the unspoken horrors that lurked in these parts. He offered me a ride, and as we drove away, I glanced back at the vast, relentless desert, a place where echoes of ancient rituals and modern terror intertwined. In the weeks that followed, I found myself unable to escape the memories of those long, harrowing nights. The journal's words haunted me, and the images of masked cult members and primitive symbols were etched into my mind. I began reaching out to local authorities and historians, desperate to piece together the history of Devil's Crossing and the cult known as the Followers of the Forgotten. Each conversation confirmed that the area was steeped in legends, a twisted mix of indigenous traditions and the brutality of modern fanaticism. Now, as I write these words from the relative safety of a small town far from that accursed desert, I know that the scars will never fully fade. The isolation of Devil's Crossing forced me to confront not only a violent, hidden cult, but also the darkness within myself. My journey through that desolate landscape was a brutal reminder that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are not the ghosts of the past or the supernatural forces whispered about in old legends, but the very human capacity for cruelty and madness. I remain a soldier, haunted, yes, but also more determined than ever to use my experiences as a warning. The desert is a place of secrets, where every shifting shadow and every echo in the night carries the weight of untold stories. And while I have managed to escape with my life, I know that the terror of Devil's Crossing and the Followers of the Forgotten will continue to haunt those who dare to wander too far into the realm of forgotten rituals. My name is Jack Henderson, and though I have left the desert behind, its echoes remain with me. A constant reminder that even in the barren wastelands of northern Nevada, the line between survival and oblivion is as thin as a desert breeze. My name is Alex Carter. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of the most harrowing RV trip of my life. It all began one crisp autumn morning when my three closest friends, Jordan, Sam, and Mia, joined me on what was supposed to be a liberating journey into the wilds of the Ruby Mountains, Nevada. We craved an escape from our urban confines, a chance to reconnect with nature and ourselves. Little did I know, nature had plans far more sinister than any of us could have ever imagined. We piled into my aging RV, a battered vehicle that had seen better days. It groaned under the weight of our supplies, our hopes, and our collective determination to get away from it all. I was the natural leader of our little band, pragmatic and resourceful, though I concealed my own inner uncertainties behind a calm facade. Jordan, the sensitive and creative soul of our group, was armed with a high-resolution camera and a journal, determined to capture every breathtaking and every inexplicable moment. Sam, a rugged survivalist with a brash, no-nonsense attitude, was our go-to for building fires and navigating rough terrain. Even though he carried an almost obsessive streak of superstition that I initially brushed off as mere eccentricity. And then there was Mia, optimistic, empathetic, but haunted by past traumas. That deep well of intuition that made her the unofficial guardian of our emotional well-being. We set our course for the Ruby Mountains, a place famed not only for its majestic vistas, but also for its deep indigenous roots steeped in Navajo lore. The local legends spoke of skinwalkers, shape-shifting beings capable of assuming grotesque forms, predatory in nature, and said to be cursed spirits roaming the wilderness. At the time, I dismissed these stories as fanciful folklore, relics of a bygone era. I was determined to enjoy our adventure without succumbing to superstitions. But nature, as I would soon learn, has a way of forcing its truth upon you. Our journey started off with a sense of excitement and camaraderie. We shared laughs over Sam's dubious jokes about the creepy stories from local diners, and Jordan's enthusiastic snapping of photos as we drove through winding roads flanked by dense pines. However, the RV's reliability began to waver almost immediately. The electrical system flickered intermittently, and on a chilly afternoon as we ascended a rugged trail, the heating system sputtered to an unceremonious halt. We shrugged it off as an old machine's quirks, though a nagging unease settled in the back of my mind. The first night at our isolated campsite was deceptively serene. We parked on a small clearing near a gurgling creek, surrounded by towering pines whose shadows danced in the dying light. As dusk settled in, an unnatural silence enveloped the woods. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature. It was the kind of silence that presses against your skin, making every sound seem amplified. While most of us prepared for bed inside the RV, Mia sat by the window, her eyes distant and troubled. I remember her whispering, "I keep seeing something out there, something wrong." When I asked what she meant, she only shook her head, as if too afraid to speak the words aloud. Later that night, while everyone slept, I was awakened by an inexplicable sensation, a chill that crept along my spine. I looked out the small, grimy window and noticed a pair of large, shifting footprints near the edge of our campsite. They were irregular, almost as if they belonged to an animal, but with a deliberate, almost intelligent pattern. I tried to dismiss it, but deep down, a primal warning echoed in my mind. The next morning, the remnants of our uneasy night clung to us like a fog. Sam, usually confident and unflappable, grew agitated over every creak of the RV and every unexplained rustle outside. "I don't like this," he muttered, his eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting an attack at any moment. Jordan, ever the observant one, mentioned that his camera had captured a blurry image of something, an indistinct shape lurking just beyond the camp. His voice trembled slightly as he explained. It almost looked human, but not really. I tried to rally the group, insisting that we remain calm and stick to our plan. However, the mounting tension was palpable. Our differences in approach began to surface. My insistence on rationality clashed with Sam's growing superstitious dread, and Mia's quiet fears only deepened as she confided in me about the vivid, unsettling dreams she'd been having. In these dreams, she saw a gaunt, animalistic figure stalking her in the woods, a figure with eyes that burned with a predatory light. That night, as the wind died to an eerie stillness and the moon was hidden behind thick, roiling clouds, the RV's electrical system faltered once again. The flickering lights cast long, wavering shadows that played tricks on our already strained nerves. I remember lying in my bunk, heart pounding, when a soft, guttural whisper drifted through the darkness. It wasn't a language I recognized. It was a sound of warning, or perhaps a call of hunger. Unable to sleep, I stepped outside to confront the source of the sound. The cold night air bit at my skin as I scanned the darkness, my flashlight slicing through the inky black. That's when I saw it. A fleeting glimpse of a silhouette at the edge of the clearing. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, half human, half beast. For a moment, I was paralyzed, caught between disbelief and terror. The figure's eyes, when they caught the beam of my light, shone with an intensity that seared into my memory. The next day, I gathered the courage to share my encounter with the group. Mia's face grew pale as she recounted her nightmare, and Sam's eyes darted nervously toward the tree line. Jordan's hands shook slightly as he reviewed his photos, insisting that there was something lurking in the frames, an entity that shouldn't be there. Despite our growing fear, we decided to press on, determined to reach a nearby ranger station to report our experiences. Our plan to leave the wilderness was thwarted by the RV's failing equipment. The engine sputtered and coughed, and our attempts to fix the electrical issues only led to further complications. Stranded and desperate, we realized that escape would not come easily. In our desperation, we recalled a conversation Sam had overheard at a local diner back in town about a Native American elder who resided in a remote part of the Ruby Mountains, a man reputed to possess ancient wisdom regarding the land and its spirits. With no other viable options, we decided to seek him out. The journey to his secluded dwelling was fraught with its own challenges. The narrow, winding trails led us deeper into the wilderness, and the oppressive silence of the forest seemed to thicken with every step. The group's morale was low, and tension simmered beneath every word exchanged. We argued over the best route, the potential dangers of the unknown, and even over the limited supplies we had. Despite these conflicts, our shared fear slowly knit us together, a reminder that survival required unity. As we trudged through the underbrush, the eerie atmosphere persisted. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind, felt like an omen. And then, as if the forest itself had decided to reveal its secrets, we encountered our next harrowing sign, a series of crude totems carved into the bark of ancient trees, symbols that resonated with the dark lore of the Navajo skinwalkers. After what felt like an eternity wandering off the beaten path, we finally found the dwelling of the elder, a modest cabin built of weathered wood and stone, hidden beneath a canopy of gnarled pines. The man who greeted us was as enigmatic as the legends that preceded him. His eyes were deep and knowing, and his voice carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. He listened intently as we recounted our experiences, the strange footprints, the eerie silence, the ghostly sightings, and the chilling dreams. He nodded gravely and explained that what we were dealing with was indeed a skinwalker, a malevolent spirit capable of shape-shifting and bringing death to those who trespass on its domain. He told us that the skinwalker was not merely a figment of legend, but a dangerous, violent force that preyed on the vulnerable and exploited the isolation of the wild. The elder's advice was cryptic, yet filled with an unmistakable urgency. He spoke of ancient rituals meant to appease the restless spirit of the land, emphasizing respect for the natural world and adherence to long-forgotten customs. "You must not force your will upon the darkness," he warned in a low, resonant tone. "Instead, offer it a passage, a release from its torment. Only then might it leave you in peace." We left the elder's cabin with more questions than answers, burdened by the knowledge that the danger was very real. Our sense of dread deepened as we retraced our steps back to the RV, every rustle and shadow a reminder of the relentless presence stalking us. Back at the RV, the atmosphere was thick with tension and fear. The night was advancing rapidly, and we knew that the skinwalkers' harassment was only intensifying. As darkness fell once again, we fortified our position. Sam took charge of setting up makeshift barriers around the RV, while Jordan and Mia rigged early warning signals with whatever materials we could salvage. I, for my part, kept a vigil at the door, every nerve on high alert for any sign of movement outside. It wasn't long before our precautions proved inadequate. In the dead of night, amidst an almost suffocating silence, the RV's exterior was suddenly assailed by violent force. I awoke to the sound of shattering glass and guttural snarls, my heart pounding as I rushed to the window. There, in the faint glow of my flashlight, I saw it. A horrifying figure lunging toward us, its form contorting in a way that defied human anatomy. It was the Skinwalker, its eyes glowing with malevolence as it attacked with a fury that left no doubt of its deadly intent. Panic erupted in our cramped RV. Sam's survival instincts kicked in as he hurled improvised weapons at the creature, while Mia screamed in terror. Jordan, ever the observer, frantically recorded the unfolding chaos with trembling hands. I struggled to maintain order, urging everyone to retreat to the interior of the RV and barricade the doors. Despite our desperate efforts, the Skinwalker's assault was relentless. It seemed to glide through our defenses as if mocking our feeble attempts at protection. In the ensuing melee, chaos reigned. The creature's onslaught was not only physical but psychological. It fed on our fear, each shriek and cry amplifying its savage power. In the midst of the struggle, I felt a searing pain as the creature struck me, a reminder that this was not just a supernatural specter, but a being capable of inflicting real, mortal harm. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity, each minute stretching into an endless nightmare. In the final desperate moments of the confrontation, a tragic loss sealed our grim reality. Amid the chaos, one of our own, Sam, was overpowered by the creature. I watched in horror as his brash defiance was extinguished by the brutal, inhuman strength of the Skinwalker. His screams echoed in the cold night, a sound that will haunt me forever. When the creature finally receded into the darkness, it left behind a silence more deafening than its roars. In the aftermath, grief and shock warred with survival instincts. The RV, our fragile sanctuary, now bore the scars of a violent intrusion. The group was shattered by Sam's loss, and the promise of escape seemed as distant as the stars hidden behind oppressive clouds. Yet, in that profound sorrow, we found a renewed determination. We had to survive, not just for ourselves, but for the memory of the friend we had lost, and for the ancient land whose secrets we had unwittingly disturbed. Dawn broke with a reluctant light, its weak rays piercing the gloom of a night filled with terror. The damage to the RV was extensive, and it was clear that staying put was no longer an option. With heavy hearts, we decided to abandon the battered vehicle and attempt a foot journey back to civilization. Our departure was fraught with the ever-present threat that the Skinwalker might still be lurking, its eyes fixed upon us from the shadows. As we navigated the rugged terrain, the forest around us seemed to close in. Every rustle, every whisper in the wind was a harbinger of the malevolent force that had haunted our nights. We moved as silently as possible, a desperate band of survivors united by grief and terror. Jordan's camera, once a tool for capturing beauty, now served as a chronicle of our ordeal, a constant reminder of the horror that we could neither escape nor forget. In the days that followed, we encountered further signs that the Skinwalker's influence had seeped into every corner of the wilderness. We came across abandoned campsites marked by strange symbols, and we heard tales from local hikers of eerie encounters and sudden, inexplicable disappearances. The legends that had once seemed like distant folklore had now become our reality. woven into every aspect of our struggle for survival. Even as we finally emerged from the dense wilderness and found help, the scars of that fateful trip remained indelibly etched in my memory. I often lie awake at night, replaying the moments of terror. The cold chill of the night air, the haunting cries of the skinwalker, and the agonizing loss of a dear friend. The journey back was not just a physical escape, but a painful reckoning with the forces that lurk in the shadows of nature and within our own hearts. In the months since that ordeal, I have tried to piece together what happened, searching for meaning in the inexplicable and solace in the face of tragedy. The indigenous lore that we had once dismissed now serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the natural world is filled with mysteries beyond our understanding, and that sometimes ancient forces awaken when we dare to disturb their rest. I still carry Jordan's journal and his photographs, now a haunting archive of our descent into terror. Mia's once bright eyes have dimmed with sorrow, yet her empathy remains a beacon of hope in a world that has grown darker since that night. And though Sam is gone, his memory fuels our resolve to honor his life by living with the wisdom and humility that the wilderness demanded of us. I share this story not to seek pity or sensationalize our suffering, but to serve as a testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of unspeakable horror. The Ruby Mountains, with their ancient pines and whispered legends, stand as a reminder that nature is both beautiful and terrifying, a realm where the past is never truly dead and where the boundaries between myth and reality blur in the twilight. In the end, I learned that survival is not just about escaping physical danger, it is about confronting the inner darkness that resides within each of us. The Skinwalker, that merciless, shape-shifting predator born of Navajo lore, was not merely a supernatural being. It was a mirror reflecting our deepest fears, our vulnerability, and the price of ignorance when we tamper with forces older than ourselves. Now, every time I see the silhouette of a pine tree against the fading light, I am reminded of that fateful trip, a time when friendship, courage, and the raw power of nature collided in a struggle for life and sanity. And though I carry the weight of that night with me, I also carry a newfound respect for the ancient world and its unyielding mysteries. My name is Alex Carter, and at 34, I am forever changed by the whispers in the pines. Every rustle in the dark, every inexplicable shadow serves as a reminder that some legends are born from truth, and that the wilderness holds secrets that can never be fully unraveled. This is my truth, a truth forged in terror, loss, and the relentless pursuit of survival amidst the haunting echoes of the wild. My name is Riley Lawson. I'm 29 years old, and this happened in the autumn of 2023 when I decided to leave behind my painful past for a while and seek solace on my own. I drove my old RV to a secluded clearing near Lake Tahoe, Nevada, determined to heal my broken heart and find some clarity in the quiet of the wilderness. I had been carrying the weight of loss for far too long. The memory of someone dear, gone too soon, haunted my every thought. I believed that the isolation of nature would help me piece together my shattered self. Little did I know that the land I had chosen was steeped in ancient curses and tragic echoes of a bygone era. Pulling the RV into a small, overgrown clearing bordered by towering pines, I felt a bittersweet relief. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as I set up camp. The RV, though modest and worn, was my safe haven on wheels. I unpacked my few belongings with care, trying to create a sense of order in the chaos of my emotions. The first night, as the sun dipped behind the rugged peaks, I sat outside my RV watching the fading light. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and the silence was almost comforting. But then I heard it. A distant, childlike laughter that didn't belong in the dead of night. The sound was soft, almost playful, yet it sent an inexplicable shiver down my spine. I glanced around, half expecting to see a group of kids at play, but there was no one in sight. Instead, small, antique-looking toys lay scattered near the edge of my makeshift camp, as if they had been dropped by an unseen hand. I couldn't explain it. That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned in the creaking cot of my RV, my mind racing with thoughts of the laughter and the mysterious toys. In the depths of my troubled sleep, I dreamed of a young girl with sorrowful eyes, standing alone in a vast barren field. Her gaze was pleading, as if begging for help or forgiveness, and I awoke drenched in cold sweat. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it was just my grief manifesting in dreams. However, as the day progressed, I began to notice more unsettling signs. The RV's power flickered sporadically, and the once comforting hum of the engine now sounded unreliable. Outside, I could swear I heard hushed voices drifting on the wind, whispers that seemed to call my name in a soft, melancholic tone. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to venture into the nearby town to find some answers. I made my way to a local historical society where I met Miss Evelyn Cruz, a kindly historian with an enigmatic air about her. Miss Cruz welcomed me into her cluttered office, where old photographs and yellow documents were scattered about. Over steaming cups of bitter coffee, I explained the strange occurrences at my campsite. The laughter, the scattered toys, the fleeting apparitions in my dreams. Her eyes darkened as she listened. "You've awakened echoes of a troubled past," she said softly. "This land carries the weight of a curse, a legacy of a witch trial that ended in tragedy centuries ago." She explained that during the late 1800s, a woman accused of witchcraft was executed under questionable circumstances. In her final moments, the woman's dying curse was said to have condemned the land, condemning it to a cycle of sorrow and unrest. Miss Cruz showed me an old diary, its leather cover cracked with age. The diary had belonged to a mother who had lost her children during that fateful period. The entries were filled with anguish, detailing bizarre rituals and the desperate attempts to appease the vengeful spirit of the executed witch. I felt a chill as I read her words, as if the diary itself carried the weight of the curse. Armed with this new knowledge, I left the Historical Society with a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding. The past, it seemed, was not content to remain buried. That evening, unable to quell the growing unease, I took a solitary walk along a narrow dirt trail leading deeper into the forest. The path twisted between ancient trees, their branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. As twilight deepened into night, I stumbled upon a small weathered cabin hidden beneath a canopy of pines. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, and the dim light of a lantern flickered in the window. Hesitantly, I approached and knocked on the creaking door. An old man answered, a hermit who lived on the fringes of society, shrouded in mystery and local lore. He was gaunt, with eyes that seemed to peer into another world. Without a word, he motioned for me to sit by the fire inside. Over the crackle of burning wood, he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "The spirit of the witch still roams these woods, tormenting the innocent and any soul brave or foolish enough to disturb her slumber," he warned. He told me of a ritual that could potentially break the curse, a ritual that required the return of the diary to the earth and the burial of a symbolic token, a locket that once belonged to the grieving mother. This had to be done at a specific hilltop known locally as Whispering Ridge, where the winds carried the voices of the lost. The hermit's words were cryptic, yet carried an undeniable urgency, and I knew that if I wanted to find peace, I had to follow his guidance. Returning to my RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive with echoes of sorrow and rage. That night, the ghostly apparitions grew bolder. I caught fleeting glimpses of children's silhouettes playing among the trees, their forms ethereal and glowing faintly in the moonlight. The young girl from my dreams appeared again, her eyes full of silent plea and overwhelming sadness. Each encounter felt like a confrontation with my own inner demons. The ghosts were not just echoes of a long-ago tragedy. They mirrored my own grief, guilt, and the haunting memories of loss. I began to understand that my journey was not only about escaping my past, but about facing it head-on. The supernatural manifestations were a twisted reflection of the pain I carried within, urging me to seek redemption and forgiveness. Determined to break the cycle of torment, I resolved to complete the hermit's ritual. I spent the next few days preparing as best as I could, gathering the necessary relics. I kept the diary close, a symbol of the sorrow that had befallen so many before me, and I searched for the locket among my few belongings. It was a delicate piece of jewelry, a relic from a time when love and loss intermingled in the fragile tapestry of human emotion. I also made several trips back into town to speak with Sheriff Donovan, a no-nonsense lawman whose pragmatic nature had made him a reluctant believer in the local legends. He had encountered unexplained phenomena in his long career, and, though skeptical, he listened with a somber nod as I recounted my experiences. "The land has its secrets," he said, his eyes clouded with memories of unsolvable cases. "Just be careful, Riley. Sometimes the past doesn't want to be forgotten." As the day of the ritual approached, the supernatural activity intensified. The RV's power failures became more frequent, plunging me into darkness at the most inopportune moments. The laughter of unseen children grew louder, more insistent, as if they were gathering in protest. At night, the ghostly apparitions danced on the periphery of my vision, and the whispers, always whispering my name, seemed to follow me wherever I went. I took long, solitary walks in the forest to try to calm my frayed nerves, but every step was a reminder of the tragedy that lay hidden beneath the surface of this cursed land. I felt as if I were being led inexorably toward a final confrontation with the past. A confrontation that would force me to confront not only the vengeful spirit of the executed witch, but also the raw, unhealed wounds of my own heart. On a stormy night, with heavy clouds cloaking the sky and a biting wind howling through the pines, I set out for Whispering Ridge. The trail was treacherous, muddy from recent rains, and the oppressive darkness seemed to swallow me whole. My RV lay abandoned behind me, a silent witness to the journey I had taken from isolation into the very heart of the unknown. At the ridge, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable energy. The wind carried with it soft, mournful voices, and I could almost see shapes moving in the distance. I knelt on the cold, damp earth and opened the diary, reading aloud a passage that detailed the desperate pleas of the grieving mother who had lost her children. With trembling hands, I clutched the locket and recited the hermit's instructions, offering these relics to the earth as symbols of sorrow, loss, and the hope for redemption. The moment my voice faded into the storm, the air shifted. The wind stilled, and a heavy silence descended. Then, as if drawn from the very depths of the cursed past, she appeared, the spirit of the executed witch. Her form was both terrifying and tragic, a swirling mass of shadow and despair. Her eyes burned with a fury that was at once ancient and deeply personal, and her presence exuded a palpable malice. For what felt like an eternity, I stood my ground as the spirit advanced. The air crackled with energy, and the ghostly figures of children emerged around us, their expressions a mix of sorrow and accusation. The witch's spirit let out a piercing wail, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of my soul. In that moment, I understood that this confrontation was not just with an ancient curse, but with the darkest parts of myself. The spirit lashed out, her spectral form swirling violently. I felt a surge of panic, but I forced myself to remain calm. I repeated the words of the ritual, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The relics in my hands seemed to glow faintly, imbued with the sorrow of ages past. The spirit's fury intensified, and the ground trembled beneath my feet as if the very earth was in turmoil. In the midst of the chaos, I could sense the pain behind her wrath, the anguish of a woman who had been wronged and condemned by history. I realized that to break the curse, I needed not only to banish her, but also to acknowledge the suffering that had led to her vengeful state. I spoke softly, almost as if in a prayer, urging her to find peace, to release the torment that bound her to this world. For a long, agonizing moment, time seemed to stand still. The raging wind, the storm, and the cacophony of ghostly whispers all faded into a silence that was heavy with expectation. Then, as if accepting my plea, the spirit's form began to waver. The malevolence in her eyes softened, replaced by a sorrow so profound it nearly broke my resolve. With one final mournful cry, she dissipated into the night, leaving behind an eerie calm. I remained on that ridge long after the storm had subsided, my body trembling from the adrenaline and the sheer weight of what had transpired. The ghostly apparitions of children slowly faded, their mournful whispers becoming nothing more than a distant memory. I felt a strange sense of relief and bittersweet closure wash over me, a recognition that, while the curse might not be entirely lifted, a piece of its hold on this land had been broken. In the days that followed, I returned to my RV with a quiet determination. I contacted Sheriff Donovan and Miss Cruz to share the outcome of the ritual, their expressions a mix of disbelief and reluctant acceptance. The local community, long accustomed to unexplainable occurrences, viewed my story with wary respect. I kept the diary and the locket in a small wooden box, preserving them as symbols of a painful but necessary journey toward healing. The experience left its mark on me. I began to understand that redemption was not a simple matter of erasing the past, but of embracing it, acknowledging the grief, the guilt, and the sorrow that had shaped me. The ghostly echoes of that cursed land, once a source of terror, had become a mirror reflecting my own inner turmoil and the possibility of moving forward. Months have passed since that stormy night on Whispering Ridge. I still live in my RV, though now it feels more like a home than refuge from my past. The woods around Lake Tahoe continue to whisper their ancient secrets, but I listen to them with a new understanding. The sorrowful laughter of distant children, the rustling of leaves under a gentle breeze. These sounds no longer fill me with dread, but serve as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope for renewal. I have learned that the supernatural is not always an external enemy to be vanquished. Sometimes, it is the reflection of our own wounds, the echo of a history too heavy to bear until we finally confront it. My journey into that haunted wilderness was not merely about breaking a curse. It was about accepting the parts of myself that I had long tried to escape. In sharing my story, I hope to remind others that the path to healing is rarely straightforward. The land holds its mysteries, and the past will always linger in the shadows, waiting for a chance to be acknowledged. For me, the ritual on Whispering Ridge was both an end and a beginning, a moment when I faced the ghosts of my past and chose to let go of the pain that had bound me for so long. Now, every time I step outside my RV, I feel the crisp air and the silent presence of the woods, and I smile, knowing that I have found a fragile peace amidst the echoes of sorrow and hope. The journey continues, and with each new dawn, I carry with me the lessons learned on that stormy night. A testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of redemption, even in the face of ancient curses. This is my truth. A solitary journey of healing, set against a backdrop of haunted legends and whispered secrets. A journey that taught me that sometimes the only way to move forward is to confront the darkness within, and in doing so, to finally let the silent echoes fade away. My name is Mark. I'm 32, and this is the story of the most terrifying weekend of my life. A journey that began as a simple RV escape into the wild, only to plunge us into a nightmare deep in the Ruby Mountains of northern Nevada. We set out on a crisp Friday morning, the kind of day that promised adventure. I was behind the wheel of our aging RV, a battered yet beloved vehicle I'd inherited from a friend. Its dents and scratches a testament to past adventures. My companions for this trip were Julie, Tony, and Rachel, friends I'd known for years, each with their own quirks and strengths that had drawn me to them. Julie, with her warm, caring nature and an ever-present air of cautious wisdom, had been the one to meticulously plan our journey. Tony, the pragmatic and technically inclined one, was in charge of ensuring our equipment was up to par, though I could already sense a hint of skepticism in his tone when we discussed the local legends. And then there was Rachel, quiet and introspective, whose reserved demeanor belied a deep sensitivity to the unseen. Her steady documentation of our travels on her battered notebook lent an air of gravitas to our endeavor. We were bound for the Ruby Mountains, a rugged, isolated region famed not only for its breathtaking vistas, but also for its eerie reputation. Tales of tragic history and whispered legends of lost children and malevolent spirits had reached our ears. While I relished the thrill of exploring the unknown, Julie's anxious glances and Tony's rational dismissals of ghost stories quickly set the stage for what would become an unforgettable ordeal. Our excitement was palpable as we drove deeper into the wilderness. The roads narrowed and twisted through dense pine forests and rocky ridges, the landscape gradually shifting from gentle hills to a harsher, more unforgiving terrain. The RV's engine grumbled steadily, and as dusk fell, we parked near a small clearing overlooking a valley cloaked in shadows. That first night, we set up our modest campsite. The stars stretched out above us like an endless tapestry, and the crisp air held a whisper of something ancient and unfathomable. But even as we shared laughs and tentative plans around a small campfire, an undercurrent of unease seeped into the silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness beyond our little circle of light was watching, waiting. It wasn't long before the RV began to betray its age. Just as we were settling in for the night, the lights flickered erratically. I climbed down to inspect the electrical panel, only to find that one of the circuits had shorted out. Tony's face darkened with irritation. "This old clunker is falling apart on us," he muttered, his logical mind already calculating the odds of repair versus replacement. His technical competence, however, did little to soothe the rising anxiety among us. The malfunction, though minor, sparked a flare-up of tensions. Julie's worry was palpable. She insisted we should call for help, or at least consider finding a more reliable shelter for the night. I tried to keep the mood light, urging everyone that these things were part of the adventure, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that fate was aligning against us. Rachel, who had been unusually quiet since we parked, finally spoke up in a soft, almost hesitant tone. "I'm not sure it's just the RV," she said, her eyes scanning the surrounding darkness as if expecting something to materialize. I dismissed her concerns as the product of too many ghost stories, yet her unease resonated with me more than I cared to admit. It was shortly after midnight when the true terror began. I awoke to a sound that sent shivers down my spine. A distant, childlike laughter, eerie and haunting in its purity. I stepped outside into the cool night air, my senses on high alert. The laughter echoed faintly through the trees, bouncing off the rugged rock faces of the mountains. As I walked toward the sound, my flashlight beam caught sight of something impossible. A series of small handprints smeared in what looked disturbingly like dirt, leading away from the RV. My heart pounded as I followed the trail to a small clearing near a narrow canyon. There, carved crudely into the rock face, were symbols that looked almost ritualistic, their jagged lines illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. I felt as if I had stumbled into a place where time itself had lost meaning, a place where ancient rituals had once been performed. The wind whispered around me, carrying with it faint voices, snatches of a sorrowful melody that seemed to cry out in despair. Returning to the RV in a daze, I recounted what I'd seen. Julie's face went ashen, and even Tony's skepticism faltered for a moment. Rachel, her eyes wide, whispered, This is what the legend spoke of. The spirit of the Ruby Mountains, the one that claims the lives of lost children." The next morning, with the sun barely peeking through the heavy clouds, we gathered around the RV, now burdened with an oppressive atmosphere. Over a meager breakfast, we debated our next steps. Tony insisted on practical repairs, while Julie wanted to leave immediately and find help. I, caught between the lure of adventure and a growing dread, suggested we try to understand what we were facing. I pulled out my phone and began researching the local lore. What I found sent chills down my spine. According to accounts passed down by local Paiute legends and recorded in historical archives, the Ruby Mountains had been the site of numerous tragedies. During the harsh winters of old, many children were lost to the brutal elements, their bodies never found. Over time, their spirits were said to have lingered, twisted by grief and anger, evolving into a malevolent force that preyed on the living. These restless souls, coupled with the tales of an ancient evil spirit that haunted the area, painted a picture of a land cursed by sorrow and violence. Julie, who had been quietly reading over my shoulder, looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We shouldn't be here, Mark. There's something out there that doesn't want us to disturb its rest." But despite her fear, there was also a spark of determination, a desire to confront the unknown. That night, the atmosphere around our RV grew increasingly oppressive. The once familiar sounds of the wilderness now took on an ominous tone. The laughter returned, louder and more insistent, as if the spectral children were gathering in force. Shadows moved unnaturally along the edges of our camp, and a cold wind, sharper than any ordinary gust, swept through the clearing. I woke in the middle of the night to find the RV bathed in an eerie, flickering light. Rushing outside, I saw, to my horror, a figure dressed in a tattered white dress standing at the edge of the woods. Her face was obscured by a veil of shadows, but I could see eyes that burned with an otherworldly intensity. For a moment, she seemed to be beckoning me, a silent plea that turned to a twisted snarl as she began to fade into the darkness. "Mark!" Julie's voice cut through the night, filled with panic as she and Tony joined me outside. Rachel, clutching her notebook, looked as if she might cry. "That's the spirit, the one that's supposed to haunt these mountains," she whispered, her voice trembling. We stood there, frozen in disbelief, as the supernatural presence grew bolder. The air turned frigid, and I could feel an oppressive force pressing down on us, as if the very mountains were condemning our intrusion. Realizing that we could not simply wait for the terror to escalate further, Julie proposed that we try to appease the spirit using an old cleansing ritual she'd read about in local lore. It said that if we perform the ritual at the very heart of the disturbance, it might calm the spirit or send it away, she explained, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Tony, though still skeptical, agreed that any action was better than helplessly standing by. Reluctantly, I nodded in agreement. "All right, let's do it," I said, my voice firm with resolve. We gathered what we could from our surroundings: a few scattered wild herbs, a small piece of polished quartz I found near the handprints, and a handful of smooth river stones from a nearby stream. Following the trail of eerie symbols we had discovered earlier, we made our way to a rocky outcrop near the canyon, where the markings were most pronounced. As midnight approached once again, we stood in a tight circle on the cold, hard ground. Julie took the lead, reciting the ancient words that, according to legend, could placate a restless spirit. The wind howled around us as if in protest, and the temperature plummeted further. In that moment, I felt as if we were teetering on the edge of two worlds: the tangible reality of our fear and the intangible realm of the supernatural. The ritual was fraught with tension. Tony's hands shook as he arranged the quartz and stones, his logical mind struggling to reconcile the inexplicable events with reason. Rachel's eyes were closed, her face a mask of concentration as she silently urged the spirits to heed our plea. And I, caught between determination and dread, led the incantation with every fiber of my being, hoping against hope that our desperate act might quell the malevolence that haunted these lands. For what felt like an eternity, the ritual went on, the silence punctuated only by the sound of our voices merging with the howling wind. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the oppressive force seemed to recede. The eerie laughter faded into a distant murmur, and the flickering lights around the canyon softened to a gentle glow. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, we believed that we had succeeded in banishing the evil spirit. But the mountains are a place where legends are woven into the very fabric of the land, and such triumphs are never absolute. In the days that followed, we continued our journey, the mood subdued and cautious. The RV's technical glitches remained unresolved, and the lingering sense of dread was a constant companion. Yet, remarkably, no further violent manifestations occurred. No sudden gusts of wind that nearly sent someone over a cliff, or ghostly apparitions that reached out with icy fingers. It was as if the ritual had only delayed the inevitable. Every night, as we camped beneath the vast Nevada sky, I found myself haunted by the memory of the white-dressed figure and the ghostly laughter of unseen children. I began to question whether our actions had truly dispelled the evil or merely placated it for a time. The local lore suggested that such spirits were dangerous and unpredictable, capable of both violent outbursts and lingering, malevolent presences that simply hung around to torment those who dared disturb their rest. Our final night in the Ruby Mountains arrived with an unsettling calm. The air was still, almost too still, as if the very earth was holding its breath. I lay awake in the RV, listening to the steady hum of the engine and the distant rustling of the pines. Suddenly, a low, guttural sound vibrated through the silence, a sound that wasn't quite animal nor entirely human. I bolted upright and peered out the window. In the gloom, I saw a figure moving with an unsteady gait along the edge of the clearing. It wasn't the spectral woman in the white dress, but something far more sinister, a doppelgänger of myself, its eyes dark and devoid of emotion. It mimicked my every twitch and movement, as if mocking my very existence. I felt a surge of terror mixed with disbelief. Had our ritual opened a door we could not close? Was this entity the spirit itself, or something even more malevolent, born of our own fears? Julie, sensing my distress, rushed to my side. "Mark, what is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I tried to explain, but the words seemed inadequate. Tony appeared at the doorway, his face drawn tight in a mixture of anger and fear. "This isn't just some ghost story," he said grimly. "It's real, and it's coming for us." In that final, desperate hour, we knew we had to act fast. The doppelganger advanced slowly, its eyes locked onto mine. It moved with an uncanny precision, as if every step was calculated to drain the life from me. I felt the crushing weight of isolation in that moment, the realization that in these vast, indifferent mountains, we were utterly alone against an ancient evil. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped forward. "Leave us alone!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the rocky walls. For a heartbeat, the figure paused, its form wavering as if caught in a gust of wind. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged at me. In the ensuing chaos, Julie grabbed my arm while Tony fumbled with the malfunctioning light switch of the RV, trying to flood the area with as much brightness as possible. Rachel, ever the observer, began reciting fragments of the incantation from the ritual, her voice rising above the tumult. The confrontation was a blur of flashing lights, shouted pleas, and the oppressive force of the supernatural colliding with our desperate humanity. Time seemed to stretch and contract all at once as I fought to break free of the doppelganger's grasp. The figure's grip was like ice, its touch draining the warmth from my skin. In that moment of terror, I felt a cold certainty. If we failed, this spirit would not simply vanish, it would claim us, body and soul. By some miracle, our combined efforts began to push the creature back. The light from the RV, though sporadic and unreliable, grew in intensity, and the recited incantation, echoing through the still air, seemed to form a barrier between us and the evil force. Slowly, the doppelganger's form began to waver, its edges blurring as if it were made of mist. With one final agonized shriek, it dissolved into the darkness, leaving us gasping and trembling on the cold ground. In the aftermath of that final confrontation, the Ruby Mountains seemed to settle into a deceptive calm. We left the clearing at dawn, the rising sun casting long, uncertain shadows across the landscape. Though our RV still limped along, its electrical faults a constant reminder of the fragility of our situation, we knew we had escaped something far more dangerous than a mere malfunction. The experience left each of us irrevocably changed. Julie's cautious nature deepened into a quiet, unspoken wisdom about the forces beyond our control. Tony's skepticism gave way to a reluctant acceptance of the supernatural, his technical mind forever haunted by the inexplicable events he had witnessed. Rachel, once so reserved, began to speak of visions and feelings that defied logic, her diary filling with sketches and cryptic notes about the spirit world. And I, Mark, emerged from that nightmare with a hardened resolve and a somber understanding. Some legends are born of tragedy and some evils are timeless. We never spoke of that night in the same way again. The Ruby Mountains had claimed a piece of our innocence, a fragment of our peace. I sometimes wonder if the spirit will one day return, drawn by our defiance or by the inexorable pull of its ancient grief. But for now, we had survived, a testament to the strength of human resilience in the face of an otherworldly terror. As I write these words, seated in the quiet solitude of my modest home, I can still hear the echoes of that distant laughter and the whisper of a promise made in the dark. The mountains remain, as silent witnesses to our ordeal, their jagged peaks a constant reminder that In the wild places of the world, legends and nightmares are never truly vanquished. They merely wait for the next soul brave enough to venture into their midst. This is my truth, my unvarnished account of a weekend that blurred the lines between myth and reality. A haunting reminder that sometimes, in the pursuit of adventure, we awaken forces that are better left undisturbed. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 40, and this happened in the autumn of last year when I set out alone in my trusty old RV, desperate to find healing and perhaps a few answers about my past. I was newly divorced and haunted by the grief of losing my father, a loss compounded by the mysteries that had always surrounded him. I needed to reconnect with the memories of my childhood summers, when my father and I camped under vast starlit skies, and to follow the cryptic clues hidden in his old journal. I had driven for hours through northern Nevada until I reached Sand Mountain, a sprawling, rugged desert landscape of rolling dunes and sparse vegetation that shimmered with an almost otherworldly glow. Locals whispered about mysterious lights and eerie voices carried on the wind, and I couldn't help but feel that the desert held secrets of its own. My plan was simple: drive my worn-out RV to the heart of the desert, revisit the spot where my father had once shared his stories, and maybe, just maybe, confront the ghostly echoes of my past. The journey began with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. My RV, though well-loved, was far from reliable. I was already aware of its temperamental electrical system and engine quirks, but I had hoped that the open road and my determination would be enough to push through any setbacks. That hope was tested sooner than expected. Not long after I left the small town of Ely, the RV's lights began flickering in the dark twilight, and an unexpected sputter from the engine forced me to pull over in a dusty, isolated service station. Inside the cramped repair shop, I met Hank, a grizzled, quiet local mechanic whose weathered face bore the marks of countless harsh Nevada winters. As he inspected my RV, he muttered, almost to himself, "The desert has a way of showing you what you least expect." His words lingered in my mind long after I left his shop, with a promise that the RV would hold together for a few more days. I couldn't tell if his warning was meant for the machine or for me. With my RV barely patched up, I resumed my journey. The loneliness of the open road began to mix with memories I had long tried to forget. Flashbacks of my father's gentle smile and soft-spoken wisdom merged with the stark, empty vistas of the desert. The relentless solitude was both comforting and unnerving, a quiet space in which every sound was amplified, every whisper of the wind filled with meaning. One sweltering afternoon, as I pulled into a small, fading gas station on the outskirts of a tiny desert town, I encountered a drifter leaning against the pumps. His eyes, sunken and wary, met mine as he said, "Don't follow the whispers in the wind. They lead you to places you might not want to go." His tone was grave, and although I couldn't shake off a sense of dismissive skepticism, I tucked his advice away along with my mounting unease. Later that day, wandering through the town's modest main street, I was approached by an elderly woman. Her lined face softened as she examined me with an intensity that was almost familiar. "You remind me so much of your father," she said softly, her voice trembling with both sorrow and hope. From her tattered bag, she produced an old leather-bound journal. "This belonged to him. I thought you might want to have it." With that, she pressed the journal into my hands, leaving me with a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost and a tantalizing clue to the mysteries that had always shrouded his life. That night, I parked my RV in a small clearing on the edge of Sand Mountain. The sky was an endless canvas of stars, and the cool desert air was punctuated by the soft rustling of sand. As I sat by a modest campfire, I leafed through my father's journal. His careful, looping handwriting told tales of the desert guardian, a benevolent spirit said to guide lost souls to redemption. According to him, this guardian appeared to those in despair, offering cryptic signs that were meant to heal deep, unspoken wounds. The more I read, the more I felt that my journey was about more than just a nostalgic return to a forgotten place. It was about confronting the shadows of my own heart. As midnight crept in, I noticed something unusual. Far out among the dunes, faint, shifting lights began to dance across the horizon. They moved with a fluid grace that was almost hypnotic, as if someone, or something, was orchestrating their motion. And then, carried on the whispering wind, I began to hear a soft, melodic sound that sent a chill down my spine. It was not a song, but rather a series of hushed voices, as if the desert itself was murmuring secrets of a time long past. I sat up, mesmerized and apprehensive, and listened as the voices seemed to beckon me deeper into the darkness. The next few days were filled with odd occurrences that defied explanation. Small personal items I'd stowed away in the RV inexplicably changed position, and on one morning I found an old photograph of my father tucked under the dashboard, a photograph I was sure I hadn't seen before. The merging of my tangible memories with these uncanny signs left me questioning my own sanity. Yet, deep inside, I sensed that these were not random incidents. They were carefully orchestrated echoes of a past I had yet to fully understand. Every evening, after a long day navigating the desert's vast emptiness, I would settle down near my RV and pore over the journal. Each entry seemed to resonate with the very landscape around me, the arid, unforgiving sands, the whispering winds, the shifting lights. The journal chronicled my father's own encounters with the guardian spirit, describing it as a luminous figure who would appear in moments of profound sorrow, offering both comfort and a call to action. Torn between rational doubt and a desperate yearning to believe, I found myself grappling with emotions I had long suppressed. One particularly oppressive night, as a cold wind swept over the dunes and the stars seemed to hide behind a shroud of clouds, my RV suddenly broke down in the middle of the desert. The engine's stuttering cough was the final straw, and I was forced to abandon my vehicle in search of help, or perhaps answers. With nothing but a flashlight and a small bag, I left the relative safety of the RV and began walking toward what seemed like an old, abandoned campsite. The path was lit only by the faint glow of my flashlight and the silver shimmer of the moon overhead. As I trudged through the silence, my thoughts churned with memories of my father and the unspoken guilt I carried for never truly understanding him. The desert, with its endless stretches of sand and silence, felt like a mirror to my soul, barbaric and barren, yet hiding depths I had not dared explore. I finally reached the old campsite, where dilapidated remnants of past lives lay scattered amid weathered remnants of campfires and rusted relics of long-forgotten journeys. There, in the midst of this desolation, I felt a presence. At first, it was merely a soft glow in the distance, a light that did not belong to any man-made source. As I approached, the light resolved into the vague outline of a figure, a spectral apparition yet imbued with an inexplicable warmth. The figure appeared to be of a man, his features softened by time and sorrow, resembling my father in a way that was both comforting and painfully evocative. His eyes, though spectral and distant, held an intensity that made me feel both seen and understood. I hesitated, caught between fear and an overwhelming need to reach out. The apparition did not speak in words. Instead, it conveyed emotion, a silent invitation to face my deepest wounds. I stood there, tears welling up as memories of my father's gentle guidance and my own lingering regrets collided. The spectral presence seemed to offer solace, a reminder that perhaps the guardian of the desert was not a force of malevolence, but rather a benevolent spirit meant to help lost souls find their way. Summoning all my courage, I stepped forward. "Is it really you?" I whispered into the cold night air, my voice trembling with a mix of hope and sorrow. The apparition's features softened further, and for a long, agonizing moment, I felt as though I were standing on the threshold between life and the beyond. In that moment of silent communion, I confronted the guilt and grief that had haunted me for years. I recalled every harsh word unsaid, every moment of regret, and I allowed the desert's quiet power to wash over me. The encounter was cathartic, a surreal blending of past and present that left me feeling simultaneously fragile and empowered. I sat down among the relics of the old campsite, letting the desert's ancient silence and the spectral presence fill the void that had long echoed within me. In that solitude, I finally accepted that some questions might never be answered, and that the mysteries of my father's past were part of what made him who he was. And in accepting that, I found a kind of peace, a reconciliation with the fragmented parts of my heart. When I eventually returned to the RV, something remarkable had happened. The engine, which had been stubbornly silent, roared back to life as if touched by an unseen hand. The electrical glitches vanished, and the RV seemed, in its own humble way, to be whole once more. It was as if the desert guardian had intervened, not only in my soul, but also in the very machinery that had carried me on this journey of self-discovery. The following morning, with the sun slowly rising over the dunes, I packed up my few belongings and prepared to leave Sand Mountain. I still clutched my father's journal, a reminder of both my loss and my newfound understanding. The echoes of the spectral encounter, the whispers in the wind, and the shifting lights would forever be etched into my memory. I knew that the desert still held many secrets, and though I left with lingering questions about the true nature of the guardian spirit, I also carried with me a quiet acceptance of life's inexplicable mysteries. Driving away from the abandoned campsite, I felt a gentle shift inside, a transformation born of solitude, sorrow, and an unexpected communion with the supernatural. The vast emptiness of the desert had forced me to confront my inner demons, to acknowledge the pain and regret I had long buried beneath layers of skepticism and fear. In doing so, I had found a spark of resilience and hope that had been dormant for far too long. Now, as I continue my journey on the open road, I look back on that time with a sense of bittersweet gratitude. The desert taught me that healing is not about finding all the answers, but about learning to live with the mysteries and accepting that some parts of our past remain shrouded in silence. The whispers on Sand Mountain, the spectral lights dancing across the dunes, and the gentle presence that mirrored my father's kindness will always remind me that even in our darkest moments, there is a guiding light waiting to help us find our way. I still hear the soft, melodic whispers on quiet nights, faint echoes of the guardian spirit that once guided me toward redemption. And whenever I find myself overwhelmed by loneliness or regret, I remember that solitary journey into the heart of the desert, where I learned that sometimes to heal, we must first embrace the darkness within us. The road ahead remains uncertain, but I now travel it with a newfound inner strength, knowing that even the harshest of landscapes can harbor the seeds of transformation. This is my truth, an unvarnished account of a journey that began with grief and ended with a tender reconciliation of past and present. A journey that taught me that sometimes the most profound healing comes from facing the ghosts that linger in the silence of our souls. My name is Jessica, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in the autumn of 2023, during a much-needed escape into the vast and mysterious wilderness of Great Basin National Park, Nevada. I had planned this trip meticulously, believing that a weekend on the open road would soothe my urban anxieties and give me time to reconnect with nature. Little did I know that my carefully laid plans would soon unravel into a nightmare beyond imagination. I was driving my well-equipped RV, a trusty, slightly aged vehicle that had carried me on many adventures, when I met Mark and Kevin. Mark, my adventurous partner, is impulsive and fearless, with a hunger for excitement that often borders on recklessness. Kevin, on the other hand, is an old friend known for his eccentric humor and uncanny knack for fixing just about anything mechanical, though his unconventional methods sometimes clashed with my penchant for systematic planning. Our plan was simple: spend a couple of days exploring remote trails, capturing the wild beauty of Nevada, and perhaps delving into some of the local legends that had always intrigued me. I had done my research, read about the strange tales of skinwalkers and other supernatural entities rooted in Native American folklore. Even though I was a rational person, I couldn't help but feel a shiver of anticipation at the thought of uncovering secrets in a land steeped in ancient mystery. The journey began with high spirits. We left the city behind, cruising along lonely highways, the landscape gradually shifting from urban sprawl to rugged desert expanses and towering mountain silhouettes. I remember the first hint that something was off. The RV's communication system started acting up. Initially, I dismissed it as a minor technical glitch, but as night fell and our generator sputtered, leaving us in an unsettling semi-darkness, an unshakable sense of foreboding crept over me. Our RV was parked in a clearing not far from one of the lesser-known trails in the park. We set up camp with the confidence that comes from preparation. Mark, ever the thrill-seeker, suggested we take a short walk to explore the surroundings, while Kevin tinkered with the generator, trying to coax life back into our failing equipment. The desert was eerily silent, the wind carrying with it the scent of sage and something else I couldn't quite place, a metallic tang, almost like blood. As I sat by the RV, scribbling notes in my journal about the beauty of the night sky, a series of strange, unidentifiable tracks appeared around our campsite the following morning. They were not like the prints of any local wildlife. Kevin examined them closely, his eyes widening as he recalled that similar marks had been associated with warnings in the indigenous lore he'd spent years studying. "This isn't natural," he murmured, almost to himself. Our unease grew when we discovered eerie symbols carved into an ancient tree nearby. The markings were crude yet deliberate, a stark warning that someone or something wanted to communicate. Mark laughed it off, attributing it to local pranksters, but I sensed a deeper, more sinister meaning behind those symbols. That night, as we gathered around a weekly flickering campfire, the wind seemed to carry soft, almost imperceptible whispers. The voices were indistinct, like a half-remembered dream, and they sent chills racing down my spine. Tensions began to fray within our small group. I found myself at odds with Mark, whose eagerness to press on and explore clashed with my desire for caution. Kevin, while usually the mediator with his offbeat humor, seemed unusually intense, fixated on the idea that we were meddling with forces beyond our understanding. The equipment problems, the failing generator, the intermittent communication system, only added to our collective anxiety. It was as if the very technology we relied on was betraying us, a silent herald of the supernatural events to come. One crisp evening, while I lay in the RV trying to sleep, I felt a sudden drop in temperature that defied the clear night's mild chill. I bolted upright, my heart pounding, and peered out of the window. In the peripheral darkness, I caught a glimpse of a shifting silhouette, a form that defied easy explanation. It seemed to flicker between the shape of a man and that of a snarling animal. I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a gasp. Could it be that the legends were true? The following night, as the moon hung low and heavy in the sky, the horror escalated. I awoke to the sound of scratching on the exterior of the RV. At first, I thought it was an animal seeking shelter, but the sound was deliberate, almost human in its persistence. Mark, already awake from his restless sleep, grabbed a flashlight and opened the door to investigate. In that brief moment of exposure, I saw it clearly. A figure that moved with an unnatural grace, its eyes burning with a feral light, its form continuously shifting as if made of smoke and shadows. The creature mimicked Mark's every movement for a brief, terrifying second before vanishing into the darkness. Kevin later explained, between shaky breaths, that what we had encountered was likely a skinwalker, a shape-shifting entity feared in Native American legends for its ability to assume the guise of both man and beast, a harbinger of malevolent intent. His voice was quiet, trembling with a mix of dread and an almost obsessive fascination. He recalled that skinwalkers were not merely passive spirits but violent, dangerous beings that preyed on the unwary. The realization sent our group spiraling into panic. The once benign symbols, the odd tracks, the inexplicable temperature drops, all now fit into a terrifying puzzle. Our communication system remained in disrepair, isolating us further from the outside world, and the generator's erratic behavior left us vulnerable in the pitch-black wilderness. Mark's reckless determination to confront the creature directly clashed with my methodical, survival-oriented mindset. "We have to face it head-on, Jessica," he insisted, his eyes glinting with a dangerous mix of adrenaline and madness. "If we run, it'll follow us." But I knew that confronting something so malevolent without a clear plan was a death sentence. Over the next several harrowing hours, the creature made its presence known in increasingly violent ways. I remember the sound of shattered glass. One of our RV windows was inexplicably broken, sending splinters of fear through the fragile barrier between us and the dark, unknown world outside. The skinwalker circled our camp, its presence growing bolder, as if it enjoyed the terror it sowed. I could see it sometimes, out of the corner of my eye. A distortion of the landscape, a ripple in the darkness that left my heart pounding in terror. The strain of constant vigilance wore down our group's unity. Heated arguments broke out between Mark and me, our conflicting instincts clashing under the weight of the looming threat. Kevin, usually the peacekeeper, grew more insistent that ancient rites and indigenous lore held the key to our survival. "There's something in these legends, something we can use," he said, his voice a mix of fervor and desperation. "I've read about rituals that can repel these entities, but we need to be brave enough to try them." Reluctantly, we agreed to give Kevin's unorthodox methods a chance. He rummaged through his battered backpack, retrieving a collection of old, leather-bound notebooks filled with cryptic symbols and half-forgotten chants. The idea of performing a ritual in the middle of the wilderness, with a violent, unpredictable entity lurking outside, was as terrifying as it was absurd. Yet, as the attacks intensified, and one of us was injured in a particularly vicious encounter, Mark's arm was slashed by a mysterious claw-like mark, we had little choice but to try. Under the ghostly light of a waning moon, we gathered near the ancient tree where the ominous symbols had been carved. Kevin began to recite an incantation in a low, measured tone, the words flowing in a language I didn't recognize but felt deep in my bones. The air around us grew heavy, almost suffocating, and the wind seemed to carry a chorus of mournful cries. I clutched Mark's hand tightly, feeling the tremors of his fear. and closed my eyes as the words washed over me. For a moment, it felt as though the world had stilled. The only sound was the rhythmic cadence of Kevin's voice and the soft rustling of the ancient pines. Then, without warning, a violent gust of wind shattered the eerie calm, and the skinwalker reappeared. Its form even more monstrous and violent than before. It lunged at us with an unholy fury, and chaos erupted. I scrambled backwards, heart pounding, as Mark swung a heavy tool in a desperate bid to fend off the creature. The air was filled with shouts, the clanging of metal, and the unearthly screeches of the beast. In the melee, I saw the skinwalker's eyes, a pair of burning orbs filled with malice, and for a fleeting moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of terror. This creature was not content with mere intimidation. It was out for blood, and it had no qualms about crossing the line between the supernatural and the brutally physical. In the ensuing struggle, I watched in horror as Mark was thrown against the RV's wall, his blood mixing with the dust of the wilderness. It was then that I realized the stakes were far graver than any of us had imagined. Kevin continued his chant, his voice rising above the clamor as if summoning forces beyond our understanding. I focused all my will on survival, pushing past the paralysis of fear. I grabbed a makeshift weapon, a heavy iron pipe, and rushed to help Mark, who lay bleeding and unconscious. The skinwalker circled us, its movements erratic and violent, its form shimmering in the flickering light of the dying campfire. Each moment felt like an eternity, and I knew that any misstep could be fatal. The battle culminated in a desperate final confrontation. With one last surge of adrenaline, I managed to strike the creature with all my might, the impact reverberating through my arms. The skinwalker recoiled, a guttural howl escaping its malformed lips, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, it hesitated. Kevin's incantation reached a fever pitch, and I felt as if the very air around us was charged with ancient power. In that suspended moment, time seemed to slow down, and I realized that our only chance was to drive the creature away, not to destroy it, but to force it to retreat into the shadows from whence it came. In a final act of unity, Mark, Kevin, and I combined our efforts. Mark, despite his injuries, held the line, while Kevin continued his ritual with unwavering determination. I repeated the incantation from memory, a desperate invocation of protection and strength. The skinwalker's eyes flared one last time, and then, as if overwhelmed by a force it could not comprehend, it dissolved into the darkness. The silence that followed was profound, a heavy, oppressive quiet that spoke of both victory and loss. In the aftermath, we huddled together inside the battered RV, our breaths ragged and our bodies trembling. Mark's injury was severe, and I felt a deep, gnawing fear that we had lost more than just our sense of safety. The supernatural entity had proven itself to be not only a spectral menace, but a tangible, violent force capable of inflicting mortal harm. The ordeal had exposed the fragile nature of our unity, as well as the terrifying reality that legends rooted in ancient lore could come to life with a vengeance. The days that followed were a blur of anxious recovery and haunted introspection. We sought help for Mark's injuries and reported the bizarre events to the local authorities, who offered nothing more than polite skepticism. The equipment failures, the inexplicable symbols, and the blood-curdling encounters were dismissed as coincidences or the product of an overactive imagination fueled by isolation. Yet, every night, as I lay awake in the RV, I could still feel the chill of that inexplicable drop in temperature, and I'd swear I heard faint, mocking whispers echoing in the wind. In the quiet moments after our escape, I often found myself reflecting on the fragile line between rationality and myth. I had planned this trip to reconnect with nature, to document the beauty and mystery of Nevada's wilderness. Instead, I had been thrust into a world where ancient legends held terrifying power, where the supernatural was not a story to be told around a campfire, but a deadly reality that stalked us in the dark. Even now, as I write these words in the safety of my home, I cannot shake the feeling that something dark still lingers in the backwoods of Great Basin. The memory of that night, the shriek of the skinwalker, the desperate chants of ancient incantations, and the final shuddering gasp of victory over an evil force that defied explanation, remains etched in my soul. It is a stark reminder that when you venture into the unknown, you never truly leave behind the shadows that inhabit our collective past. That fateful trip not only tested our survival skills, but also forced us to confront the limits of our understanding. It tore down the veneer of modernity and reminded us that nature harbors secrets that are as old as time itself, secrets that can manifest in the most unimaginable ways. For Mark, Kevin, and me, the experience was a lesson in humility, a reminder that even in a world dominated by technology and rationality, the supernatural can emerge from the darkness with a force that no human preparedness can entirely stave off. Now, every time I see a distant figure flicker at the edge of my vision, or hear a whisper of wind that sounds almost like a voice, I pause and remember that night. I remember the terror, the pain, and the extraordinary courage that emerged when we were pushed to the brink. And though I try to move forward with my life, the haunting memories of Great Basin remain a part of me, a permanent scar etched into the tapestry of my existence. In the end, we survived, but at a cost. The creature's violence, the close call with death, and the fracturing of our once solid camaraderie left wounds that may never fully heal. Yet, I take solace in the fact that we learned something invaluable about the strength of the human spirit when confronted by forces beyond our control. It is a reminder that even in the face of the unexplainable, we have within us a resilience that can light even the darkest of nights. I share this story not to glorify fear, but to serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the wild, ancient lands we so often romanticize hold mysteries that defy explanation. For those who seek solace in the solitude of nature, remember that some legends are born from truths that linger in the shadows, waiting for the moment to awaken and remind us that we are never truly alone. As I close this chapter of my life, I carry both the scars and the hard-earned wisdom of that experience. I remain ever cautious, ever aware that in the vast wilderness of our world, the line between myth and reality is perilously thin, and sometimes the darkness itself reaches out to claim what is rightfully its own. My name is David, and I'm 45 years old. This happened in the autumn of 2023, when I decided to escape the memories that had haunted me for far too long. I lost my daughter 2 years ago, a loss so deep it shattered the light out of my days. In search of solace and perhaps a spark of inspiration for my writing, I bought an old RV and set off for Pyramid Lake in Nevada, a place whispered about in local lore and known for its windswept desolation and eerie beauty. I had envisioned this trip as a quiet retreat into nature, a chance to sit by a placid lake, jot down my thoughts, and slowly begin to mend the fragments of my broken heart. Pyramid Lake, with its vast reflective surface and stark shoreline, promised that kind of solitude. But as I soon discovered, solitude in the backcountry has a way of echoing truths you might rather forget. The first day passed in a blur of dusty highways and endless skies. I arrived at a small, secluded campsite near the lake's edge in the late afternoon. The RV, though modest, had been my faithful companion on many journeys, but almost immediately I sensed something off. As I set up camp, the engine coughed and sputtered, and the electrical system began acting unpredictably. My phone's battery died faster than expected, and every time I tried to charge it, I was met with only a faint glow from the dashboard. I shrugged it off as mere wear and tear on an old machine, but a gnawing unease settled in me as the shadows lengthened around the campsite. That night, I sat outside the RV with a notebook in hand, attempting to capture the silence of the desert and the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. The air was still, yet there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. Just as I was about to dismiss the feeling as loneliness, I heard it. A soft, distant laughter, like the giggle of a child carried on the wind. I paused, heart thumping in my chest, straining to locate its source. The sound was faint, almost as if it were coming from a dream, but unmistakably human. I told myself it was just the wind teasing the rocks, but deep inside a seed of dread had been planted. The next morning, as I set out for a walk along a rarely trodden path by the lake, I discovered strange symbols etched into a large weathered rock. The carvings were primitive yet deliberate, resembling ancient indigenous signs. I recalled reading somewhere that local tribes believed these symbols were warnings, an appeal to the spirits, perhaps, to keep away from sacred or cursed ground. I took several photos, despite my lingering skepticism, and made a note in my journal. I felt that I was intruding upon a secret, a story older than time itself, and that feeling both terrified and fascinated me. Throughout the day, I busied myself with small repairs on the RV. The engine's hiccups and the unreliable electrical system were minor annoyances compared to the inexplicable atmosphere that seemed to hang in the air. In the heat of the day, the lake's surface sparkled under the relentless sun, offering a deceptive calm. I sat on the RV's steps, eating a hastily prepared meal, and found myself scanning the distant horizon, as if expecting something to emerge from the shimmering mirage. Nightfall brought a deeper, almost palpable chill. I secured myself inside the RV, determined to get some rest, but sleep eluded me. In the dark silence, I began to hear whispers, soft, unintelligible voices that ebbed and flowed like the tide. At first I wondered if I was simply haunted by grief, my mind playing tricks on me. But as the hours passed, the voices became more distinct, almost as if they were pleading. I couldn't tell if they were warning me of something or begging for help. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, and I kept glancing toward the window, half expecting to see a pair of curious eyes peering back at me. The following days were a delicate balance between introspection and mounting dread. I spent my mornings wandering along the shoreline, collecting scattered driftwood and admiring the stark, natural beauty of the area. Yet, even in these moments of peace, I felt the invisible weight of something lurking just beneath the surface of reality. I began to see fleeting shapes near the water's edge. Pale, almost translucent figures of children playing silently, their faces turned upward as if in silent supplication. They vanished when I approached, leaving me questioning if they were mere figments of my imagination or spectral echoes of past tragedies. One afternoon, while rummaging through the small storage compartment of the RV for an old book I had found at a local flea market, I discovered a tattered volume of indigenous lore. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols and fragmented stories about the restless spirits of children, souls lost to tragedy and forgotten by time. The book recounted legends of how, in moments of profound sorrow, the spirits of the lost would wander the land, trapped between worlds, until someone offered them solace. I felt a deep, inexplicable connection to those words. Could it be that the laughter I heard at night, the spectral apparitions on the shore, were the echoes of these forlorn souls? That night, as I sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of the RV, I began to piece together the fragments of indigenous legends and my own personal grief. I read the ancient passages aloud, trying to soothe the persistent ache in my heart with the rhythmic cadence of the old language. The act of reciting those long-forgotten words seemed to stir the very air around me. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably echoing the verses from the book. I felt as if I were caught in a bridge between two realms, one foot in the tangible reality of my loss, the other in a spectral world that longed for release. Sleep became a tenuous friend. My dreams were filled with images of my daughter's smiling face, interspersed with visions of ghostly children reaching out to me. I awoke several times in a cold sweat, the taste of salt and sorrow heavy on my tongue. I started to record every encounter in my journal, each eerie laughter, every fleeting glimpse of a child's silhouette along the shoreline, and the persistent murmur of voices that sometimes sounded like a chorus of lost souls. One moonlit night, as I sat by a small fire I'd managed to rig outside the RV, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air grew thick and heavy, and the temperature plummeted, leaving my breath visible in the glow of the dying flames. The ghostly laughter returned, louder and more insistent this time, echoing across the vast emptiness of the lake. My eyes darted around, trying to pinpoint the source, and I saw them. Small figures dancing along the water's edge, their forms shimmering in the moonlight. They moved with a sorrowful grace, as if performing a ritualistic dance meant to mourn and remember. I called out softly, "Who are you?" But the only reply was the melancholic sound of the wind weaving through the desolate landscape. In that moment, the lines between memory and nightmare blurred. The figures seemed to beckon me, drawing me closer with an unspoken invitation to join them in their silent vigil. Despite every rational thought screaming for me to retreat, I felt compelled to follow. I left the relative safety of the RV, my footsteps hesitant on the cold, hard ground, and made my way toward the water. The further I walked, the more the voices filled my head, each whisper a reminder of a pain I thought I had buried. I reached the shoreline and knelt by the water, staring into its dark, reflective surface as if searching for answers in the ripples. That's when I saw it. A vision of a small child, her eyes filled with both sadness and an otherworldly wisdom. She extended a tiny hand toward me, and in that instant, I was overwhelmed by a flood of memories. My daughter's laughter, the gentle warmth of her embrace, and the unbearable weight of loss. The vision faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me trembling and questioning the nature of my own grief. Was I witnessing the spirits of lost children, or was my mind simply manifesting the face of my own sorrow? The boundary between the supernatural and my personal demons had become irreversibly entangled. Over the following days, I resolved to understand the forces at work around Pyramid Lake. I pored over the tattered book of lore, cross-referencing the cryptic symbols and stories with the carvings I had seen on the rocks near my campsite. It appeared that the indigenous legends described a ritual, a solemn act of remembrance meant to release the spirits of the lost and grant them peace. The ritual required the gathering of specific symbols scattered around the area, and a recitation of verses under the light of the full moon. I hesitated, knowing that tampering with forces I barely understood could be dangerous. Yet I also felt that I could no longer ignore the spectral presence that tormented me. As the full moon approached, I prepared myself for the ritual. I gathered the small stones and driftwood that seemed to echo the ancient symbols I'd seen on the rocks. With trembling hands, I arranged them in a circle near the water's edge, following the intricate patterns described in the old lore. My heart pounded in my chest as I recited the incantation, my voice merging with the soft, sorrowful hum of the night. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant, haunting voices of children. For a long, agonizing moment, the world around me seemed to hold its breath. Then the figures appeared again, more defined than before, their eyes no longer hidden behind a veil of mist. They circled the ritual space, silent witnesses to my desperate attempt to bridge the gap between life and death. I felt a surge of energy, as though the very air was charged with the pain of ages. In that surreal moment, I understood that these apparitions were not here to harm me in a physical sense. They were echoes of lost innocence, memories of tragedies that had never been allowed to rest. Their presence was a manifestation of the unhealed wounds of this land and of my own heart. The ritual reached its climax as I chanted the final words, my voice barely audible against the cacophony of the night. A sudden gust of wind scattered the carefully arranged stones, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw the ghostly children begin to dissolve into motes of light. The oppressive chill receded, replaced by a profound sense of melancholy acceptance. I felt as though I had offered them something long overdue, a chance to be remembered, and perhaps a step toward their release. In the days that followed, the supernatural occurrences began to fade gradually. The eerie laughter and spectral figures became less frequent, replaced by a calm that was both eerie and strangely comforting. I spent long hours by the lake, writing feverish notes in my journal as I attempted to process the overwhelming experiences. With each passing day, I realized that the journey had been as much about confronting my own grief as it had been about encountering the unknown. The isolation I had sought to escape had instead forced me to confront the darkest corners of my soul. I repaired my RV's engine and electrical system as best I could, and slowly, the mechanical failures that had plagued me seemed to resolve, a subtle sign that the forces at work might have been appeased by the ritual. Yet, I knew that the scars of this encounter would remain etched in my memory forever. The faces of those ghostly children, the sorrow in their eyes, and the echo of their laughter would forever serve as a reminder of the fragility of life and the deep wounds that grief can carve. When it was finally time to leave Pyramid Lake, I felt a bittersweet mix of relief and lingering sorrow. I drove away as the sun broke through the early morning fog, the landscape receding into a distant, dreamlike memory. The experience had changed me irrevocably. I now carried not only the weight of my own loss, but also a newfound understanding of the ancient ties that bind us to the land and to one another. I knew that the ghosts of Pyramid Lake were a part of that continuum, a reminder that even in the depths of sorrow, there lies a possibility for healing and redemption. As I journeyed back to civilization, I began to write the long, detailed account of my time at Pyramid Lake. My story was not one of terror in the conventional sense. There were no violent apparitions or malevolent forces attacking me. Instead, it was a tale of inner confrontation and the slow, painful process of letting go. The supernatural elements I encountered were woven with the threads of indigenous legend and personal tragedy, creating a tapestry that was as haunting as it was cathartic. Now, whenever I sit down at my desk to write, I remember those moonlit nights by the lake, the quiet ritual of remembrance, the soft voices of children carried on the wind, and the deep, unspoken connection between my grief and the ancient sorrow of the land. The echoes of lost innocence linger on, a reminder that even in the midst of isolation, we are never truly alone. The spirits of Pyramid Lake have left their mark on me, guiding me toward a path of healing and understanding that I never thought possible. I share my story not as a ghost tale meant to chill the blood, but as a testament to the power of facing our inner demons. In the silence of the wilderness, I discovered that the supernatural is often nothing more than the embodiment of our deepest fears and unhealed wounds. And sometimes, in embracing those echoes of the past, we find the strength to finally move forward. Looking back now, I realize that Pyramid Lake gave me something unexpected. A bridge between the sorrow of what was lost and the possibility of redemption. I drive on, the road stretching out before me as a promise of new beginnings, carrying with me the memory of a place where the past and the present merged into something greater than either could be alone. And though I will always carry the bittersweet pain of my daughter's absence, I also carry the gentle, ghostly smiles of those lost souls, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there is the faint glimmer of light waiting to guide us home. My name is Ethan, I'm 41, and this happened in the desolate backwoods of North Appalachian, Nevada. A journey I embarked on to escape the ghosts of my past, only to be haunted by new ones in ways I never imagined. I had spent years as a journalist, chasing stories that often left me with more regret than closure. One story in particular, a tragic mining accident in a remote town, had burned itself into my memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed the people whose lives I had tried to expose. Seeking redemption in solitude, I loaded my meager belongings into an old RV and set off into the rugged wilderness, hoping the endless desert would help me reconcile with my inner demons. The road out of the city was long and lonesome. As I drove, my thoughts churned like the dust swirling outside my windows. I found myself replaying moments from the past, questioning every decision, every word I had written. The RV, with its creaking floorboards and unreliable engine, felt like a physical manifestation of my own battered soul. It sputtered and groaned as I pushed it further into the barren landscapes, a constant reminder that nothing in life came without a cost. On the first day, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, I pulled off the main road onto a narrow, winding trail that cut through the hills. The scenery was hauntingly beautiful. A tapestry of red rock, with ghost towns and abandoned mining sites dotting the horizon. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant call of a lone coyote. I set up camp near what appeared to be an old mining trail, its faded markers barely clinging to memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into a forgotten chapter of history. That night, while I sat by a small crackling fire, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible humming sound carried on the wind. At first, I dismissed it as the whistling of the desert breeze, but as the minutes passed, the sound morphed into a quiet melody, almost like a lullaby sung by unseen voices. I felt an involuntary chill run down my spine. Clutching a worn notebook to my chest, I scribbled down my impressions, trying to make sense of the sensation. The wind, the shadows, and that eerie hum all wove together into a tapestry of unease that I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I set out on foot to explore a nearby ghost town that locals whispered about. A place where a mining disaster had claimed the lives of an entire family. The ruins were steeped in sorrow. Decaying buildings, rusted tools, and an overwhelming sense of abandonment. As I wandered through the crumbling streets, I discovered an old, tattered journal lying on the ground. Its pages, yellowed and brittle with age, were filled with cryptic entries and hastily drawn sketches. The words spoke of tragic events, unspoken regrets, and restless spirits that refused to move on. I couldn't help but feel that the journal was meant for me, a silent message from the past urging me to confront what I had long avoided. That night, back at the RV, things grew even more unsettling. The power flickered sporadically, and the radio, which had been a comforting presence during long drives, began to pick up nothing but ghostly static. I sat in the dim light of a battered lamp, reading through the journal's cryptic entries. They recounted the lives of a family lost to the mine's collapse, a mother, a father, and two small children, whose untimely deaths were never properly mourned. The final entry was the most disturbing, a desperate plea for forgiveness, written in trembling script, as if the writer feared the very act of writing might invoke the wrath of something unseen. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, plagued by nightmares of the spectral family, faces blurred by tears, hands outstretched as if pleading for help. I awoke several times to the sound of soft whispers echoing through the RV. At first, I convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the persistence of the voices made it impossible to dismiss them as mere hallucinations. I stepped outside into the inky darkness, straining to catch a glimpse of anything that might explain the sounds. All I saw was the vast, unyielding night, punctuated by the cold gleam of distant stars. The following day, determined to find answers, I sought out the local historian at a small diner in a nearby town. The man, an elderly Native American with deep, sorrowful eyes, listened intently as I recounted my experiences. He told me the story of the lost mining family, explaining that their tragic fate had left an indelible scar on the land. He spoke of ancient traditions and the belief that unresolved tragedies could cause the spirits of the departed to linger, trapped between the realms of life and death. His words resonated with me, and I began to understand that the eerie events were not simply the products of a tortured mind. They were something far older and more profound. Armed with this new perspective, I decided to return to the ghost town, determined to face the phantoms of the past head-on. That evening, as I approached the ruins, a dense fog began to roll in, cloaking the abandoned streets in a spectral shroud. The familiar hum returned, louder and more insistent, as if the wind itself was singing the mournful dirge of lost souls. I walked slowly, every step feeling like an intrusion into a sacred space. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and I could almost see fleeting images of a family moving silently among the dilapidated structures. Then, in a moment that felt suspended in time, I saw them. A spectral family standing in the center of what once must have been a bustling town square. The figures were ghostly, their forms translucent and glowing faintly under the moonlight. They appeared as if they were reliving a final, tragic moment. The mother's eyes were filled with a sorrow that cut deep, the father's expression one of resigned despair, and the children, their small faces etched with a haunting innocence, seemed to be silently calling out for help. I froze, rooted to the spot, as the apparitions turned toward me. They did not move with aggression. Rather, they exuded a profound sadness, as if they were trapped in a cycle of endless mourning. My heart pounded, not out of fear for my life, but from the overwhelming emotion that washed over me. I realized that these spirits were not there to harm me. They were there to make me confront the unresolved pain of the past. In that moment, I felt the weight of my own guilt, the burden of a story that I had once covered without fully grasping its human cost. As I stood amidst the spectral figures, the fog thickening around me, I mustered the courage to speak. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I failed you. I failed all of you." My words hung in the cold air, mingling with the quiet rustle of the wind. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the apparitions began to dissipate, their forms fading into the darkness like smoke on the breeze. It was as if my confession had released them from their eternal vigil. In the days that followed, I returned to the RV, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The supernatural encounters had transformed from a source of terror to a catalyst for introspection. I spent hours poring over the journal, piecing together the fragments of the family's story and my own guilt. The RV, once a claustrophobic prison became a quiet sanctuary where I could process the revelations that had emerged from the depths of the past. Yet, even as I began to heal, the landscape around me continued to whisper its secrets. Equipment failures persisted. Flickering lights, unexpected power outages, and the incessant hum that seemed to echo the lament of the dead. I realized that the land itself was alive with memory and grief, a living testament to the tragedies it had borne witness to. Every gust of wind and every creak of the RV was a reminder that the past was never truly gone. It lingered, woven into the very fabric of the wilderness. One stormy night, as I sat in the RV listening to the relentless pounding of rain against the metal roof, I felt an overwhelming urge to confront the supernatural one last time. The storm raged like the turmoil within me, and I stepped outside into the torrential downpour. The darkness was absolute, the only light coming from intermittent flashes of lightning that illuminated the barren landscape. I walked toward the ruins, guided by an inexplicable force, until I reached the heart of the ghost town. There, beneath the shattered remains of an old storefront, I saw a final vision. The spectral family gathered once more, but this time they were not alone. The presence of the lost souls was accompanied by an indescribable energy, a force that seemed to pulse from the ground itself. I knelt on the rain-soaked earth, feeling the damp chill seep into my bones, and spoke with a trembling voice. "I know what I did. I know I can't change the past, but I promise to honor your memory, to tell your story with the truth and respect it deserves." In that moment, the oppressive energy lifted ever so slightly, replaced by a fragile calm. The apparitions lingered for a few precious minutes longer, as if acknowledging my words, before they began to fade into the storm. The rain washed over me, carrying away the remnants of sorrow and regret, leaving behind a sense of catharsis I had never experienced before. When I finally returned to the RV, drenched and exhausted, I realized that the journey was far from over. I still had miles to travel before I could truly call myself free of the past, but I had found a measure of forgiveness, both from those I had lost and from myself. Over the next several weeks, I slowly repaired the RV, bit by bit, just as I was mending the wounds of my soul. I began documenting the entire experience, the haunting, the spectral family, and the quiet redemption I had found in the ruins of a forgotten town. I shared my story with anyone who would listen in the local town's small cafes and community centers. I spoke not only of the tragedy that had once burdened me, but also of the cathartic release that came from acknowledging the past and offering atonement. The reactions were mixed. Some people believed wholeheartedly, others dismissed it as the ramblings of a man haunted by his own regrets. But for me, the truth was undeniable. The land held memories that demanded to be remembered, and my journey had become a pilgrimage of healing and understanding. Now, as I sit here writing these words in my journal, I can still hear the faint echo of that lullaby in the wind, a reminder of the spectral family that guided me toward redemption. My RV has become both a home and a vessel for the stories of the past, a moving testament to the idea that even in the harsh, unforgiving wilderness of North Appalachian Nevada, there is room for healing, forgiveness, and the quiet promise of renewal. The ghosts of that tragic mining town are now a part of me, not as a source of terror, but as a constant reminder that every life lost deserves to be remembered and honored. I continue to travel these lonely roads, carrying with me the weight of my past and the hope that, one day, I will finally be free of the shadows that once consumed me. And though I know the journey ahead will not be easy, I am no longer running from the ghosts. I have embraced them. And in doing so, I have learned that redemption is found not in forgetting, but in remembering, understanding, and finally forgiving. My name is Ethan, I'm 41, and what began as a desperate escape turned into a pilgrimage of sorrow and healing. The solitude of the desert and the whispers of forgotten souls have taught me that even the deepest scars can mend when we confront our past and honor the lives that once were. And so, as I set off once again into the vast, silent expanse of North Appalachian Nevada, I do so with a quiet resolve and a newfound peace, knowing that I have finally begun to lay the ghosts to rest. My name is Jordan. I'm 34, and this all happened in the remote wilds of North Appalachian Nevada. A trip I thought would be a refreshing escape from city life, only to become a nightmare that still haunts my every waking moment. We set off in my aging RV one crisp September morning, full of hope and a thirst for adventure. Alongside me were my three closest friends. Olivia, 32, whose intuitive nature and deep interest in local folklore always gave her a certain air of quiet wisdom. Mike, 33, a charismatic, impulsive soul who masked his fears with humor and bravado. And Sarah, 29, sensitive yet resilient, the peacemaker whose cautious optimism usually held our group together. Our destination was Lamoille Canyon, stretching towards the fringes of Great Basin National Park, a place known not only for its stunning vistas, but also for the eerie legends whispered among the locals. The journey began with high spirits. I recalled countless times when the open road had been a balm to my restless mind, and this trip promised a return to that lost simplicity. However, it didn't take long for the first hints of trouble to surface. The RV's engine sputtered erratically as we drove along narrow, gravel-lined roads. The dashboard lights flickered ominously, and the GPS, which I relied on so much, began to malfunction, leading us off our planned course. Despite these issues, we pressed on, dismissing them as minor setbacks in a rusty old vehicle. Late one evening, as the sun dipped behind the rugged peaks and painted the sky in hues of burnt orange, we decided to set up camp by a cluster of towering pine trees near an ancient trail. The crisp autumn air carried a palpable stillness, and it wasn't long before the oddities began. While I was unloading supplies, Olivia wandered off a short distance down a dirt path. She returned with a troubled expression, telling us she had discovered strange carvings on a nearby tree, symbols that resembled those found in local indigenous lore, symbols of warning. She pressed her trembling hand against her chest as if the sight had struck her deeply. That night, as we huddled inside the RV trying to ignore the creeping unease, Sarah was the first to hear the soft, unplaceable whispers outside. At first, we all agreed it was the wind, rustling through the branches. Yet, as the minutes stretched into an hour, the murmurs grew more distinct, as if voices were trying to communicate in a language long forgotten. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine as I tried to peer out the window, only to see nothing but the impenetrable dark. Morning brought no relief. As we stepped out of the RV, we found a set of large, unexplainable footprints pressed into the damp earth near our tires. The prints were too deep and irregular to be from any ordinary animal. Mike joked awkwardly about Bigfoot on a camping trip, but his forced smile did little to hide his unease. Tensions started to simmer beneath the surface. I, as the de facto leader, insisted we should keep moving, but Mike's natural skepticism and his insistence on detouring to find help for our malfunctioning equipment only added to the discord. Olivia, with her quiet, urgent voice, cautioned us to pay attention to the signs, while Sarah tried to mediate the rising conflict, her eyes reflecting a deep-seated fear. Determined to reach a nearby town for repairs, we set off along a narrow, winding road that cut through the dense forest. The further we drove, the more the eerie ambience grew. Trees towered over the road like silent sentinels, their branches intertwined to form gnarled patterns against the twilight sky. It was during one of these stretches that we decided to pull over at a small, run-down diner that served as a local watering hole. There, we met an elderly Native American man, a local historian with a quiet, solemn presence. Over cups of weak coffee, he shared with us a chilling tale, a legend of a cursed shapeshifter, a skinwalker whose origins lay deep within the indigenous traditions of these lands. According to him, this creature was no mere ghost or myth. It was a malevolent being that could assume the guise of any living thing, a dark mirror of its victim. He described how it stalked the outskirts of ancient trails and remote campgrounds, luring unsuspecting travelers into a web of fear and chaos. His words, spoken with a mix of reverence and dread, sent a shiver down my spine. We left the diner with more questions than answers, our minds buzzing with the possibility that the odd occurrences we'd experienced might be more than mere coincidences. As night fell on our journey back to the campsite, the supernatural presence seemed to tighten its grip on us. The RV's engine roared to life one moment and died the next, leaving us stranded on a desolate stretch of road. The darkness was punctuated by distant, blood-curdling howls and rustling in the underbrush. I remember clutching the steering wheel tightly as I navigated the winding back roads, my senses heightened by the fear of what lurked just beyond the reach of my headlights. The situation deteriorated rapidly that night. We decided to camp in place, hoping that a few hours of rest would help us regroup and plan our next move. But sleep was elusive. Olivia kept awake, scribbling notes in a battered journal, her eyes constantly darting toward the door. Mike, usually the life of our group, sat in the corner, his laughter replaced by an anxious silence. Sarah, ever the mediator, tried to calm us all, but even she couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. It was during one of these restless hours that I first saw it, a fleeting glimpse of movement outside the RV. Through a narrow crack in the window, I saw a figure, barely distinguishable from the dark, watching us. At first I thought it was a trick of my imagination, but as I strained to see, the figure seemed to mimic our every movement. It was as if it was studying us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I nudged Olivia, who upon seeing it whispered, "It's like it's reflecting us, but it's not us." Her words confirmed what I feared. We were being hunted by a creature from our darkest nightmares. The following night, the terror escalated. A violent storm lashed the RV, thunder shaking its very foundation. The wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, and rain battered the metal sides relentlessly. In the midst of the storm, the skinwalker made its move. It attacked without warning, crashing into our makeshift barriers with a ferocity that left us reeling. I recall the shrill sound of shattering glass and the panicked cries of my friends. In the chaos, I watched in horror as the creature, a grotesque amalgam of shifting shadows and snarling teeth, clawed its way into our temporary sanctuary. In that moment, survival became our only thought. Olivia, drawing upon the indigenous rituals and lore the local elder had shared with us, began to chant softly. Her voice, trembling at first, grew steadier as she recited words in an ancient tongue. Words meant to summon protection and drive away evil. I helped Sarah secure the RV, barricading the doors and windows with anything we could find. Mike, usually the skeptic, abandoned his habitual humor and took on the role of distraction, stepping out into the storm with a makeshift torch in hand. His impulsive act was a desperate bid to buy us time, and though his face was etched with fear, his determination was unmistakable. The battle that ensued was brutal. The skinwalker was relentless, its attacks growing more violent with each passing moment. At one point, I felt the searing pain of a claw slashing across my arm as I tried to hold the barricade in place. The creature's eyes burned with an unholy light as it circled the RV, probing for weaknesses. I could hear Mike's muffled shouts and Sarah's frantic instructions as we fought to keep it at bay. Amid the chaos, a moment of clarity struck me. This wasn't just a supernatural encounter. It was a test of our unity, our ability to overcome fear together. But as the night wore on, tragedy struck. In one heart-stopping moment, the skinwalker lunged through a gap in our defenses, targeting Mike as he attempted to lead it away from the others. I'll never forget the sound of his scream, a raw, desperate cry that echoed through the storm. Despite our frantic efforts to rescue him, the creature's ferocity was too much. Mike was caught in a violent struggle, and when the first light of dawn crept in, he lay motionless on the ground. A stark reminder that in our fight for survival, death was an ever-looming possibility. In the cold, gray light of early morning, the skinwalker retreated, vanishing into the depths of the forest as if it had never been there. The silence that followed was heavy with grief and disbelief. We gathered around Mike, our hearts shattered by the loss of our friend. The storm had passed, but the scars of that night would remain etched in our souls forever. In the aftermath, as we tended to our wounds and tried to make sense of the horror we had endured, Olivia took the lead in a way I hadn't expected. With a solemn expression and a quiet determination, she gathered the remnants of the indigenous ritual we had attempted that night. She explained that the skinwalker, as the elder had described, was not merely a mindless beast. It was a vengeful spirit, an embodiment of ancient curses and the dark side of human nature. Its violent nature was not random, but purposeful, meant to punish and to spread fear. Sarah, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "We have to honor his memory by ensuring this never happens to anyone else." Her words, laden with sorrow, also carried a promise of resilience. We agreed that we couldn't simply walk away from the horror. We needed to document it, to seek help from those who understood these ancient forces, and perhaps to find a way to prevent such tragedies in the future. The journey back was somber and reflective. The RV, battered and unreliable from the night's events, limped along the winding roads as we made our way toward the nearest town. I kept replaying the events in my mind, the unsettling carvings on trees, the whispered voices in the dark, the relentless pursuit of the skinwalker, and the agonizing loss of Mike. Each memory was a reminder of the fragile boundary between our world and the supernatural, a boundary that had been brutally breached. In town, we sought out the local historian again. This time, his eyes held even more sorrow as he confirmed our worst fears. The skinwalker's presence was a dire warning of old curses reawakened. He urged us to share our story so that others might be wary of the ancient forces that still roamed these lands. "The wilderness is not only beautiful," he said gravely, "it is alive with memories and grudges that have no place in our modern world." For weeks, I struggled to come to terms with everything that had happened. Nights were the worst, when the dark seemed to echo with distant howls and the rustling of unseen creatures. I found myself haunted by visions of that grotesque, shifting figure, its eyes burning with malevolence, its presence a constant reminder of the thin line between myth and reality. Olivia and Sarah remained by my side, their shared grief binding us together as we slowly began the process of healing. We took turns revisiting our recordings and notes, trying to piece together a coherent narrative from the chaos of that stormy night. In our meetings, often held in the quiet corners of local cafes, Olivia would gently remind us of the indigenous lore, the rituals meant to ward off evil, and the belief that acknowledging these ancient forces was the first step toward protection. Sarah, ever the peacemaker, would speak of the importance of unity and trust, emphasizing that our survival had depended on our willingness to work together, even in the face of overwhelming terror. My own role in all of this was complex. As the leader, I had to grapple with the weight of responsibility, the decisions made, the arguments fought, and the ultimate price we paid. I questioned my own ability to lead and wondered if I could ever forgive myself for the loss of a friend. But over time, the memory of Mike transformed from one of sorrow to a silent vow that I would do everything in my power to honor his life by preventing such tragedies from recurring. One chilly evening, several months after the incident, I returned to the outskirts of Lemway Canyon. I parked my RV near the spot where it all began, a solitary figure among the towering pines. The air was still, and the forest exuded an eerie calm. I stepped out into the twilight, feeling a mix of dread and determination. I had come not only to confront my fears, but to seek closure with a past that refused to let go. As I walked the familiar path, I found one of the old trees marked with the same ancient symbols that had first alarmed us. I paused, laying a small bouquet of wildflowers at its base. A silent offering, a gesture of respect for the land and its mysteries. In that moment, I realized that the supernatural presence we encountered was as much a part of these lands as the rocks and trees. It was a force that demanded acknowledgement, not defiance. I whispered a quiet apology to the spirits of the forest, to Mike, and to every lost soul that had suffered in the shadow of that cursed night. In the stillness, I felt a subtle shift, a faint warmth that suggested that perhaps the cycle of violence could be broken if we approached the unknown with humility and reverence. Now, as I write these words, I do so with the hope that sharing our story will serve as both a warning and a reminder. The wilderness holds secrets that defy modern logic, and sometimes the past reaches out with desperate claws to remind us that we are never truly alone. My journey through those dark hours changed me irrevocably. It taught me that survival isn't just about escaping danger. It's about understanding and respecting the ancient forces that shape our world. The memory of that night and the loss of a dear friend remains a constant companion. But it has also become a source of strength, a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable horror, the human spirit can endure and find meaning. I continue to travel these roads, now with a deeper awareness of the unseen and the unknowable, and with a commitment to preserve the stories of those who have fallen victim to the relentless grip of the supernatural. In the end, what happened in those remote backwoods was not merely an encounter with a malevolent entity. It was a confrontation with the dark side of our history and the unhealed wounds of the land. And though the scars remain, I carry them as a testament to our resilience, a silent pledge to honor the past and protect the fragile boundary between our world and the mysteries that lurk just beyond the light. My name is Jordan. I'm 34, and I survived that harrowing night. I share my tale not to invoke fear, but to remind us all that sometimes the legends are real, and in the quiet depths of the wilderness, the echoes of ancient curses and lost souls are never far away.